The entire security checkpoint froze when TSA officer Grant Whitaker slammed a woman's medical bag onto the metal table and sneered, "Step aside, bitch." Passengers pulled out phones as he dumped trauma kits and surgical equipment across the counter, laughing at the military badge he assumed was fake. But across the terminal, Navy SEAL Chief Marcus Doyle went rigid. His combat K-9 had locked onto the quiet woman with laser focus, refusing every command to stand down, because that badge belonged to a unit that officially didn't exist. And Marcus whispered one word into his radio: confirmed. The airport had just humiliated someone they would never forget. Before we dive into this story, I want to invite you to stick around until the very end to see how justice unfolds. If you're enjoying this, please hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see just how far these stories have traveled. Now let's get into what really happened that day. The morning rush at Riverside International Airport in Denver moved with its usual chaotic rhythm. Businessmen juggling coffee and laptops, families wrangling strollers through security, solo travelers shuffling forward in sock feet with their belts already removed. The TSA checkpoint hummed with the repetitive soundtrack of trays sliding along conveyor belts, the periodic beep of metal detectors, and the low murmur of hundreds of conversations blending into white noise. Lena Hart stood in line near the back, her posture relaxed but her eyes scanning everything. She looked unremarkable in every way: faded jeans, a gray hoodie that had seen better days, worn sneakers, and a simple black backpack slung over one shoulder. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face carried the kind of tired expression that suggested too many late nights and not enough sleep. She could have been anyone: a college student heading home, a freelancer traveling for a gig, a nurse coming off a double shift, which was exactly the point. She shuffled forward when the line moved, placing her backpack and phone into a gray plastic bin without being asked. No jewelry to remove, no laptop to extract, no questions about liquids or electronics. She'd done this 1,000 times, and she knew the routine better than most of the agents working the checkpoint. When her bin disappeared into the X-ray scanner, she stepped through the metal detector without incident and waited on the other side, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady and controlled. Around her, other passengers grabbed their belongings and rushed toward their gates. Businessmen refastened their watches. Parents wrestled shoes back onto squirming toddlers. Everyone moved with the impatient energy of people who had places to be. But Lena's bin didn't come through. She waited, still calm, still patient. Then a voice crackled over the radio near the scanner station. "We need a supervisor at lane 3 by 8. The TSA agent operating the X-ray machine, a younger guy with a name tag that read J. Morrison, leaned closer to his screen, squinting at whatever image had appeared there. He tapped a button, rewinding the scan, then zoomed in on a specific section of the bag. Lena's expression didn't change, but her focus sharpened. A moment later, a second agent appeared, older, stockier, with the kind of swagger that came from years of unchallenged authority in a confined space. His name tag identified him as Officer Grant Whitaker, and the way he moved suggested he enjoyed being called over for problems. He stepped up to the monitor, crossed his arms, and studied the screen with exaggerated scrutiny. "What have we got?" Whitaker asked, loud enough that nearby passengers glanced over. Morrison pointed at the display. "Dense items, metal instruments. Looks like medical equipment, but the density pattern's unusual. Could be tools, could be something else." Whitaker nodded slowly, his mouth curving into a smirk. "Could be a lot of things." He turned toward the conveyor belt and pulled Lena's bin off to the side, setting it on the stainless steel inspection table with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the checkpoint. Conversations nearby began to quiet. A few passengers slowed their pace, curiosity overriding their hurry. Lena stepped forward, her movements fluid and unthreatening. "That's my bag," she said quietly. Whitaker glanced at her, taking in the tired eyes, the plain clothes, the complete lack of anything noteworthy. His smirk widened. "I can see that." He unzipped the backpack without asking permission and began pulling items out one by one, setting them on the table in a deliberate display. "Let's see what we're working with here." The first item was a compact trauma kit in a sealed plastic case, then a set of tourniquets still in their sterile packaging, then surgical gloves, sterile gauze, a collapsible IV stand. Hemostatic dressings, chest seals, emergency airway tools. Each item landed on the table with a small thud. Passengers nearby stopped pretending not to watch. Lena's voice remained calm. Those are registered medical supplies. I'd appreciate it if you contacted a medical supervisor before handling them further. Whitaker paused mid-reach and looked at her with open amusement. You'd appreciate it? He repeated, his tone dripping with condescension. Lady, you don't get to tell TSA how to do our job. I'm not telling you how to do your job, Lena replied evenly. I'm informing you of protocol for handling specialized medical equipment during transport. Whitaker's smile faded into something colder. He didn't like being corrected, especially not by someone who looked like they'd just rolled out of bed. Protocol, he echoed mockingly. He reached into the bag again, this time pulling out a small black case about the size of an eyeglass holder. He popped it open without hesitation. Inside were 3 auto-injectors, compact, military-grade, labeled with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to most civilians. What are these? Whitaker demanded, holding one up to the light. Emergency medication injectors, Lena said. Epinephrine, atropine, and morphine sulfate, all properly documented and sealed. Uh-huh. Whitaker set the case down and dug deeper into the backpack. His fingers found something solid near the bottom, clipped to an internal panel of fabric. He pulled it free. It was a badge. Small, rectangular, made of brushed steel with an embossed insignia in the center, a design that didn't match any standard military branch. No words, no unit identification, just a symbol that looked vaguely official and completely unfamiliar. Morrison leaned over to look at it. What is that? Whitaker turned it over in his hand, studying it with exaggerated suspicion. Then he held it up for the growing crowd of onlookers to see. Looks like someone's been playing dress-up, he announced loudly. A few passengers chuckled nervously. Others pulled out their phones and started recording. Lena's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed controlled. That's official identification. I recommend you verify it through proper channels before making assumptions. Whitaker laughed outright. Verify it? Lady, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know fake military gear when I see it. He tossed the badge onto the table next to the medical supplies. Stolen valor, he said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. That's a federal offense, you know. Lena didn't respond. She just stood there, hands at her sides, breathing steady, eyes locked on Whitaker with the kind of stillness that most people mistook for submission. But it wasn't submission. It was assessment. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Should we call someone? Oh, we're calling someone, Whitaker said. He reached for his radio. I'm calling airport police. We're detaining her for impersonating military personnel and attempting to transport unverified medical equipment through a secure checkpoint. The words hung in the air like a sentencing. Passengers whispered to each other, phones angled for better shots. The energy in the checkpoint shifted from curious to hostile, the crowd unconsciously siding with the uniformed authority figure who spoke with such confidence. Lena said nothing. She just waited. Because she knew something Whitaker didn't. Ouch. Across the terminal, in a quieter section near Gate C7, Chief Marcus Doyle was having a very different kind of morning. He moved through the crowds with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent 2 decades in operational environments where hesitation got people killed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair starting to gray at the temples, Marcus looked every inch the Navy SEAL he was, even in civilian clothes. His duffel bag hung from one shoulder, and at his side, connected by a short tactical leash, walked his K9 partner, a Belgian Malinois named Ranger. Ranger was 3 years old, 65 pounds of muscle and focus, trained in explosives detection, patrol work, and tactical operations. He'd deployed twice overseas and had a detection record that made him one of the most reliable working dogs in the Navy's K9 program. Right now, he was supposed to be walking calmly beside Marcus toward their gate. Instead, he'd stopped moving entirely. Marcus felt the tension in the leash before he saw the behavior. He glanced down. Ranger stood frozen mid-stride, ears forward, body rigid, eyes locked on something across the terminal. His nostrils flared slightly, processing information that Marcus couldn't perceive. Ranger, Marcus said quietly, using the tone that usually brought instant compliance. The dog didn't move. Marcus followed Ranger's line of sight. Through the crowds, past the coffee kiosks and bookstores, He could just barely make out the TSA checkpoint at the far end of the concourse, too far to see details, too far to hear what was happening. But Ranger saw something. "What is it, boy?" Marcus murmured. Ranger's tail lowered slightly. Not a wag, not aggression, but a specific posture Marcus had seen before. It was the stance Ranger took when he recognized someone with operational authority, someone who'd worked with military K-9s before, someone who understood the language of command and control that civilians never learned. Marcus's instincts sharpened. He started walking toward the checkpoint, letting Ranger lead. As they got closer, the crowd thickened. Marcus saw passengers filming something, heard raised voices, saw TSA agents clustered around an inspection table, and then he saw her, a woman in a gray hoodie, standing perfectly still while an officer dumped medical equipment onto a metal table. Her posture was wrong for a civilian under stress, too controlled, too measured, the kind of calm that came from training, not personality. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Ranger pulled harder on the leash, trying to move forward. "Easy," Marcus said, but he didn't pull the dog back. Instead, he angled closer, positioning himself where he could see and hear without drawing attention. Whitaker's voice carried across the checkpoint. "So tell us," he was saying, his tone thick with mockery. "What are you pretending to be today? Combat nurse? Special forces medic?" The woman didn't answer. Whitaker held up the badge again, turning it so the cameras could capture it. "This look real to anyone? Because it sure as hell doesn't look real to me." A few passengers laughed. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Marcus studied the badge from a distance. Even from where he stood, something about it looked familiar. Not the design, he couldn't make out the details from this far away, but the type of badge, the size, the material, the way it sat in Whitaker's hand. He'd seen badges like that before, in places that didn't officially exist. Ranger suddenly lurched forward, pulling hard enough that Marcus had to brace himself. The dog's focus was absolute now, locked onto the woman like a laser sight. "Ranger, heel!" Marcus commanded sharply. The dog ignored him completely. That never happened. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his chest. Military K-9s didn't ignore direct commands unless they'd identified something critical, a threat, an explosive, or someone they recognized as having higher authority. Before Marcus could process that thought, Ranger broke free from his grip and trotted directly toward the inspection table, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Marcus swore under his breath and followed, pushing through passengers who were too busy filming to notice him. Ranger reached the woman and sat down beside her, his posture shifting into a formal alert position, the kind of sit he did when acknowledging a handler or commanding officer. The TSA agent stared at the dog in confusion. Whitaker laughed. "Well, look at that. Even the dog thinks something's suspicious." But Marcus wasn't laughing. He was watching the woman's reaction. She glanced down at Ranger. No surprise, no confusion, just a brief flicker of recognition. Then she did something that made Marcus's blood run cold. She leaned down slightly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the checkpoint, and whispered one word, "Easy." Ranger relaxed immediately. His ears softened, his breathing slowed. He shifted from alert posture into a resting sit, as if he'd just received a stand-down command from his primary handler. Marcus stopped breathing. That wasn't a civilian giving a dog a generic command. That was field protocol. That was deployment vocabulary. That was the exact tone and inflection used by K-9 handlers in operational environments to communicate mission complete, threat neutralized, stand down. Civilians didn't know that command structure. Hell, most soldiers didn't know it unless they'd worked directly with K-9 units in combat zones. Marcus's mind raced. Who was this woman? Where had she learned that? And why was a Navy K-9 treating her like a ranking officer? Whitaker's voice cut through his thoughts. "Call airport police," Whitaker was saying into his radio. "We've got a situation at Checkpoint 3. Possible stolen valor, unauthorized medical equipment, and uncooperative behavior. I want her detained immediately." Marcus made a decision. He stepped away from the crowd, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't used in 6 months. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "JSOC Operations." "This is Chief Marcus Doyle, SEAL Team 5K9 Division," Marcus said quietly. "I need immediate verification on personnel. Priority clearance." There was a pause. Go ahead, Chief. I'm at Riverside International, Denver. TSA is detaining a female civilian carrying medical gear and a badge I can't identify. My K-9 just responded to her using operational command protocols. I need to know if she's flagged in the system. Another pause, longer this time. Stand by. Marcus heard keystrokes in the background. Then silence. Then a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Chief Doyle, what is her current status? She's about to be arrested for stolen valor. Do not let that happen. Marcus's pulse quickened. Can you confirm her identity? Negative, but I can confirm that badge is registered in a database you don't have clearance to access. I'm escalating this immediately. Keep eyes on her until we can get people on site. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, his mind spinning. A database he didn't have clearance to access. He was a Navy SEAL with over 15 years of service, multiple deployments, and access to classified operational networks that most intelligence officers would never see. And someone just told him he wasn't cleared to know who this woman was. He looked back toward the checkpoint. Lena Hart stood exactly where she'd been before, calm, still, waiting. But now Marcus understood something Whitaker didn't. That woman wasn't pretending to be someone important. She was someone important enough that even mentioning her name required clearance he didn't have. And the airport was about to find out exactly how badly they'd screwed up. Airport police arrived 4 minutes later. 2 officers in dark blue uniforms pushed through the crowd, hands resting casually on their duty belts, expressions neutral but alert. They'd been told to expect a routine impersonation case, someone wearing fake military gear, probably trying to get priority boarding or impress strangers at a bar later. Routine. Easy. Officer Derek Pullman, the senior of the two, approached the inspection table and glanced at the scattered medical equipment, then at Lena, then at Whitaker, who stood with his arms crossed and his chest puffed out like he'd just solved a major crime. "What do we have?" Pullman asked. Whitaker gestured toward Lena with obvious satisfaction. "Civilian female, traveling with unverified medical equipment and fake military identification. She refused proper inspection protocols and became uncooperative when questioned." Pullman looked at Lena. "That accurate?" "No," Lena said simply. Whitaker's face flushed. "She's lying. I've got witnesses. I've got video." "I requested that a medical supervisor handle the inspection due to the specialized nature of the equipment," Lena continued, her voice steady. "That request was denied. I then informed Officer Whitaker that the badge in question is official identification and recommended verification through proper channels. That recommendation was also denied." Pullman studied her for a moment. She didn't look like someone trying to scam the system. She looked tired and annoyed, but not nervous, not defensive. "Can I see some ID?" he asked. Lena reached into her pocket slowly and pulled out a standard Colorado driver's license. She handed it over. Pullman scanned it. Everything checked out. Lena Marie Hart. Denver address. Clean record in the system. No warrants, no flags, no prior incidents. "This doesn't prove anything," Whitaker interjected. "The military ID is fake. I'm telling you, I've seen this before." Pullman picked up the badge from the table and examined it. It was well made, solid metal, professional engraving, no obvious signs of cheap manufacturing, but the insignia was unfamiliar. No text, no identifying markers, just a symbol that looked official without being recognizable. "What unit is this supposed to represent?" Pullman asked Lena. "I'm not authorized to disclose that information," Lena replied. Whitaker scoffed. "Convenient." Pullman frowned. "Ma'am, if this is legitimate military identification, it should have verifiable information on it. Unit designation, service number, something." "Not all military identification follows standard formats," Lena said, "particularly for personnel operating under specialized assignments." "Specialized assignments," Whitaker repeated with dripping sarcasm. "You mean like pretending to be a secret agent?" A few passengers snickered. Pullman sighed. This was starting to feel less like a clear-cut case and more like a jurisdictional headache. If the badge was fake, it was a federal matter. If it was real but classified, that was also a federal matter. Either way, it was above his pay grade. "Look," he said to Lena, "I'm going to need to verify this through official channels. That means you're going to have to come with us until we can confirm your identity and the legitimacy of this equipment. Lena nodded once. I understand. Whitaker smiled triumphantly. But before Pullman could take another step, a voice cut through the crowd. Officer, I need to speak with you. Everyone turned. Marcus Doyle stepped forward, Ranger at his side. He moved with the kind of authority that made people instinctively step out of his way. When he reached the inspection table, he pulled out his military ID and handed it to Pullman. Chief Marcus Doyle, United States Navy, SEAL Team 5. Pullman's eyes widened slightly as he examined the credentials. Legitimate, current, high-level clearance markers. What's your involvement here, Chief? Pullman asked carefully. Marcus glanced at Lena. She met his eyes briefly, her expression unreadable. I observed the situation as it developed, Marcus said. I have reason to believe this may be more complicated than it appears. Complicated how? Whitaker demanded. Marcus turned to face him. I recommend you stop handling that badge immediately. Whitaker's mouth fell open. Excuse me? That's not a recommendation I'm authorized to explain, Marcus continued, his tone flat and professional. But I've made contact with Joint Special Operations Command. They're aware of the situation and are sending personnel to handle it directly. The checkpoint went completely silent. Pullman looked between Marcus and Lena, his confusion deepening. JSOC? Why would JSOC be involved in a TSA screening issue? I don't have that information, Marcus said. But I was told explicitly not to let this woman be detained or removed from this location until their people arrive. Whitaker's confidence wavered for the first time. That's ridiculous. She's a civilian. There's no reason for special operations to... He was interrupted by the sound of his own radio crackling to life. All TSA personnel be advised. Federal officials are en route to Checkpoint 3. Cease all enforcement actions and secure the area immediately. Do not remove or detain any individuals until further notice. Whitaker stared at the radio like it had just insulted him. Morrison looked nervous. Grant, maybe we should... No, Whitaker snapped. This is my checkpoint. I'm not letting some civilian walk in here with fake credentials just because... Officer Whitaker! The voice came from behind him. Everyone turned. 3 people had just entered the checkpoint area from the main terminal entrance. 2 were in military dress uniforms. Army officers with enough ribbons and insignia to make it clear they weren't local recruiters. The third was a man in a dark suit with a federal ID clipped to his belt. They moved with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested they'd worked together before. The man in the suit, mid-40s, gray hair, expression completely neutral, walked directly to the inspection table. He didn't introduce himself, didn't show credentials, just picked up the badge that Whitaker had been mocking for the past 20 minutes. He studied it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Whitaker. This item is authentic, he said quietly. The words landed like a grenade. Whitaker's face went pale. That's not possible. The suited man ignored him and turned to Lena. Ma'am, I apologize for the delay. We'll have you processed and en route within the next 10 minutes. Lena nodded. Understood. One of the Army officers stepped forward, addressing Pullman. We're assuming custody of this situation. Airport police presence is no longer required. Pullman looked like he wanted to argue, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outranked by several pay grades. He nodded and stepped back. Morrison had already retreated to the far side of the checkpoint. Whitaker stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The suited man began carefully repacking Lena's medical equipment, handling each item with obvious respect and familiarity. The Army officers positioned themselves on either side of the table, creating a subtle barrier between Lena and the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus watched it all unfold with a growing sense of awe. He'd seen federal responses before. He'd seen classified situations get locked down. But this was something else. This was a level of operational security usually reserved for intelligence assets, high-value witnesses, or personnel operating so far off the books that even acknowledging their existence required a security clearance most people would never have. Whitaker finally found his voice. Who is she? He asked, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The suited man finished zipping up Lena's backpack and handed it to her. Then he turned to Whitaker with an expression that could have frozen water. "That information," he said slowly, "is classified above your clearance level. Above most clearance levels, in fact." He let that sink in for a moment. Then he added, "What I can tell you is that Ms. Hart is traveling under Pentagon authorization as a medical consultant for battlefield trauma protocols. The equipment she's carrying is registered with the Department of Defense. The badge you confiscated is legitimate military identification for personnel operating under non-standard assignments, and every single action you've taken in the last 30 minutes has been recorded and will be reviewed by federal investigators." Whitaker looked like he might vomit. The suited man turned to the airport police officers. "I'll need copies of all security footage from this checkpoint for the past hour. I'll also need a list of every TSA employee who interacted with Ms. Hart or her belongings." Pullman nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Passengers who'd been filming suddenly found themselves being approached by the Army officers, who politely but firmly requested that they delete any footage taken during the incident. Most complied immediately. A few tried to argue until they saw the federal IDs and reconsidered. Lena adjusted her backpack and prepared to leave. Marcus stepped forward. "Ma'am," she turned to look at him. "Your K-9 protocol was textbook," he said quietly. A faint smile crossed her face. "Rangers well trained." "He responded to you like you were a ranking handler. He's smart enough to recognize authority when he sees it." Marcus wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know where she'd served, what unit she'd worked with, how someone with her skill set had ended up walking through a civilian airport with no security detail and no visible protection. But he already knew he wouldn't get answers. People like her didn't exist in official records. They were the ones who operated in spaces between the lines, doing work that governments needed done but could never acknowledge. "Safe travels," Marcus said instead. Lena nodded once, then turned and walked toward the security exit, flanked by the two Army officers. The suited man stayed behind, speaking in low tones with Pullman and the TSA supervisor who'd just arrived, looking deeply concerned. Marcus heard fragments of the conversation. "Full investigation. Federal misconduct review. Suspension pending outcome." Whitaker stood alone at the inspection table, staring at the spot where Lena had been standing, his entire world collapsing around him. Morrison had disappeared entirely. The crowd slowly dispersed, passengers returning to their hurried journeys, already forgetting the incident in favor of their own travel stress. But Marcus didn't forget. He stood there with Ranger, watching the exit where Lena had disappeared, thinking about the stories he'd heard over the years. Whispered rumors in operator circles about units that didn't have names. Medical personnel who'd saved entire teams in conditions that should have been impossible. People who'd done things that would never be declassified, never be recognized, never be celebrated. People who'd chosen to walk away from the spotlight and disappear into normal life, until someone made the mistake of thinking they were nobody. Ranger looked up at him and whined softly. Marcus reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Yeah, boy," he murmured. "I know, we just met someone important." Across the terminal, in a private office that airport administration used for sensitive discussions, Grant Whitaker sat across from his supervisor and a representative from TSA headquarters in Washington. The video played on a laptop between them. Every word, every action, every sneer and mocking laugh captured in high definition. When it finished, Whitaker's supervisor leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. "You humiliated a Pentagon consultant on camera in front of hundreds of witnesses," she said quietly. "You confiscated legitimate military identification and called it fake. You refused a reasonable request for proper handling of registered medical equipment. And you did all of this while being recorded by multiple passengers whose footage is now circulating on social media." Whitaker tried to speak, but she held up a hand. "We're going to recommend immediate suspension without pay pending a full investigation. Federal authorities will be reviewing your conduct, and depending on what they find, you may be facing criminal charges for interfering with authorized government personnel." "I didn't know," Whitaker began. "You didn't ask," the supervisor interrupted. "That's the problem. You assumed, you mocked, you escalated, and now this airport, this agency, and everyone involved looks incompetent on a national scale." The representative from headquarters closed the laptop. "Pack your things," he said flatly. "You're done here." Lena sat in a quiet conference room near Gate D, sipping water from a plastic bottle while one of the Army officers verified her travel documents. The suited man, she'd learned his name was Collins, stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones. She felt tired. Not from the confrontation, that had been nothing compared to the things she'd endured in the field, but tired of the constant need to prove herself. Tired of people seeing a woman in casual clothes and assuming she was nobody. She'd spent years in places that didn't appear on maps, doing work that would never be acknowledged. She'd saved lives under fire. She'd developed trauma protocols that were now standard training for combat medics across multiple branches. She'd operated in conditions that would have broken most people, and she'd chosen to step away from all of it because she was done with the wars, done with the violence, done with carrying other people's secrets. But the work still mattered. So when the Pentagon called and asked her to consult on a new generation of battlefield medical systems, she'd agreed. One last contribution. One last chance to make sure the next generation of medics had better tools than she'd had. Collins ended his call and turned to her. "Your flight's been moved to a private departure," he said. "We'll have you in Washington by this evening." Lena nodded. "Thank you. I'm sorry about what happened." "It's fine." "It's not fine," Collins said firmly. "You shouldn't have been put in that position." Lena set down the water bottle. "People see what they expect to see." Whitaker saw a tired woman with medical supplies and made assumptions. Most people would have done the same. Most people aren't trained to think differently. Exactly. Collins studied her for a moment. "The stories about your unit, some of them are hard to believe." "Stories tend to grow over time," Lena said with a faint smile. "Not those stories." She didn't respond, because some things were better left unspoken. Some sacrifices were meant to stay silent, and some heroes were never supposed to be recognized. 30 minutes later, Lena boarded a small government transport through a private gate far from the main terminal. No crowds, no cameras, no drama, just another quiet professional disappearing back into the work that mattered. And across the airport, in a checkpoint that was now swarming with investigators and federal officials, Grant Whitaker learned the hardest lesson of his career. Never assume the quiet ones are powerless, because sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones you never see coming. The news broke faster than anyone expected. By the time Whitaker reached his car in the employee parking lot, his phone was exploding with notifications, text messages from coworkers, voicemails from friends, alerts from social media platforms he barely used. He sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and watched his entire professional life unravel in real time. Someone had uploaded the video. Not just one person, dozens of them. Passengers who'd filmed the confrontation from multiple angles had posted their footage within minutes of leaving the checkpoint. The clips spread across platforms like wildfire, each one showing Whitaker's sneering face, his mocking tone, his absolute certainty that he was dealing with a fraud. The comments were brutal. "TSA officer humiliates veteran nurse, gets destroyed when military shows up. This is what happens when small people get a little power. Watch this clown realize he just made the biggest mistake of his career. Respect to the woman who stayed calm while this idiot tried to embarrass her." Within 3 hours, the story had been picked up by local news stations. Within 6, national outlets were running segments. By evening, it was trending on every major platform, dissected by thousands of people who'd never set foot in Riverside International, but had very strong opinions about what they'd witnessed. Whitaker's name wasn't in the videos. Airport policy required TSA agents to wear name tags, but the footage was just blurry enough that most viewers couldn't read it. But his face was clear, his voice was unmistakable. And in the world of viral content, anonymity lasted about as long as ice in summer. Someone identified him within hours. Then came the phone calls. His supervisor had already suspended him, but that was just the beginning. TSA headquarters in Washington ordered a formal investigation. The airport's legal team began preparing for potential lawsuits. Federal investigators opened a case file to determine if Whitaker's actions constituted interference with authorized government personnel, a charge that carried criminal penalties. And through it all, Whitaker sat in his car, staring at his phone, trying to understand how a routine screening had turned into a career-ending catastrophe. He'd been so certain. The woman had looked like nobody, dressed like nobody, acted like someone who thought she was special but wasn't. He'd seen hundreds of people try to game the system with fake credentials, fake stories, fake authority. He'd developed an instinct for spotting frauds, but this time his instinct had been completely wrong, and now everyone knew it. Marcus spent the rest of the day thinking about Lena Hart. He couldn't help it. The encounter had triggered something in his operational memory, patterns and protocols that he'd internalized over years of working in classified environments. The way she'd moved, the way she'd spoken, the command she'd given Ranger. Everything about her screamed specialized training, but the kind that didn't come from standard military pipelines. After clearing security with Ranger, Marcus boarded his flight to San Diego and settled into his seat. Ranger curled up at his feet, exhausted from the morning's excitement. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened an encrypted messaging app used exclusively by SEAL team members. He typed a message to Commander Hayes, his former team leader who now worked at NAV Spec War headquarters. Need to ask you something off the record. Ever hear of medical personnel operating under units with no official designation? Black badges, no unit markers, Pentagon clearance, but not listed in standard databases? The reply came 20 minutes later, just as the plane was pushing back from the gate. Why are you asking? Marcus hesitated, then typed, "Witnessed something unusual today. Can't give details over text." Another pause. Then, "Call me when you land. Secure line only." Marcus put the phone away and stared out the window as the plane taxied toward the runway. He'd been in the teams long enough to recognize when something was deliberately compartmentalized. Information got siloed for reasons: operational security, plausible deniability, protection of assets. If Lena Hart was connected to something that required that level of secrecy, then whatever work she'd done in the field was probably something most people would never know about, including him. But it didn't stop him from being curious. The plane lifted off, Denver falling away below, and Marcus closed his eyes. In his mind, he replayed the moment Ranger had responded to Lena's command. The instant recognition, the immediate compliance. K-9s didn't fake that kind of response. They didn't pretend to acknowledge authority. If Ranger had treated her like a handler, it was because some part of his training recognized her as exactly that. Which meant Lena Hart had worked with military K-9S in operational environments. Which meant she'd been deployed. Which meant the badge Whitaker had mocked wasn't just authentic. It represented work that most people couldn't imagine. Marcus opened his eyes and looked down at Ranger, who was already asleep. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" he murmured. Ranger's ear twitched, but he didn't wake. In Washington, D.C., Lena's plane touched down at Reagan National just after sunset. Collins met her at the arrival gate with a black SUV idling at the curb. No small talk, no pleasantries, just a quick confirmation that her schedule had been updated and her hotel reservation was ready. They drove through the city in silence, the monuments glowing against the darkening sky, familiar and strange, all at once. Lena hadn't been to D.C. in 3 years. The last time, she'd been sitting in a windowless Pentagon office, debriefing after a mission that had gone sideways in ways no one had predicted. The details were still classified. The outcome was still being analyzed, but the impact had been clear enough. Her unit had completed an objective that saved lives, and in doing so, had burned every bridge back to normal military service. After that, there was no going back. So she'd walked away, turned in her gear, signed the non-disclosure agreements that would follow her for the rest of her life, and tried to build something resembling a normal existence in a world that suddenly felt too quiet, too safe, too boring. It hadn't worked. She'd tried civilian nursing for a while, worked trauma centers in Denver, pulled night shifts in understaffed ERs, threw herself into the chaos of emergency medicine. But it wasn't the same. The stakes were different. The protocols were slower. The bureaucracy was suffocating. She'd left the field because she was tired of war, but it turned out that war had left a mark she couldn't erase. So when the Pentagon called with a consulting offer, help design next-generation trauma systems, contribute to training protocols, share lessons learned from operations that would never be declassified, she'd said yes. Not because she missed the work, but because the work still mattered. Collins pulled up to a hotel in Arlington, a quiet mid-range place that catered to government contractors and military families. He handed her a key card and a folder containing her meeting schedule. "Briefing tomorrow at 0900, he said. "Pentagon, E-Ring, Section 4. Your clearance has been reactivated temporarily for the duration of the consultation." Lena took the folder. "How long am I here?" 3 days? Maybe 4? Depends on how the sessions go." She nodded. "And the incident at the airport?" Collins' expression tightened. "Being handled. You won't need to be involved unless federal charges move forward, which is unlikely. TSA is managing it internally to avoid further publicity." "Meaning they're going to bury it?" "Meaning they're going to make an example out of the people responsible so it doesn't happen again." Lena studied him. Collins was career intelligence, the kind of operator who'd spent decades managing situations that required discretion, leverage, and an understanding of how power really worked. If he said the situation was being handled, it probably was. "Thank you," she said. Collins hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, you handled that situation better than most people would have." "I've handled worse." "I know." He tapped the steering wheel once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Lena climbed out of the SUV, grabbed her backpack, and walked into the hotel lobby. The clerk at the front desk processed her check-in with mechanical efficiency, barely looking up from the computer screen. Just another traveler in a city full of them. Exactly how she preferred it. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, found her room, and locked the door behind her. The space was generic, clean but impersonal, with bland artwork and furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than comfort. She dropped her backpack on the bed and stood by the window, looking out at the lights of the city. Somewhere out there, in offices and briefing rooms and classified facilities, people were making decisions that would shape the future of military medicine. Systems that would save lives. Protocols that would give medics better tools. Training that would prepare the next generation for the realities of battlefield trauma. And for 3 days, she'd be part of that process again. Not as a soldier, not as an operator, but as someone who'd been there. Someone who'd seen what worked and what didn't. Someone who'd learned lessons written in blood and survival. She pulled out her phone and saw 17 missed calls. Most were from unknown numbers, probably reporters who'd somehow gotten her contact information. She deleted those immediately. But 2 were from a name she recognized, Dr. Sarah Vance, her former supervisor at Denver General. Lena called her back. Sarah answered on the first ring. "Jesus, Lena, I've been trying to reach you all day." "I was traveling. I saw the videos." Lena closed her eyes. "Of course you did. Everyone saw the videos. You're trending on 3 different platforms. There are news segments calling you a hero. People want to know who you are, where you served, what you did." "I'm not a hero." That TSA officer clearly disagrees. Lena sat down on the edge of the bed. "Sarah, I can't talk about what happened. You know that." "I'm not asking you to break any NDAs," Sarah said quickly. "I'm just checking to make sure you're okay. That whole thing looked humiliating." "It was inconvenient." "Lena." Sarah's tone softened. "You don't have to downplay it with me. I know you. I know what you've been through. And I know that standing there while some asshole mocked you in front of hundreds of people couldn't have been easy." Lena was quiet for a moment. Sarah was one of the few people from her civilian life who knew, vaguely, about her background. Not the details, not the missions, but enough to understand that Lena's past was complicated in ways most people couldn't comprehend. "I've dealt with worse," Lena said finally. "I know, but you shouldn't have to deal with it at all." They talked for a few more minutes. Small talk about the hospital, updates on mutual colleagues, casual conversation that felt almost normal. When they hung up, Lena felt a little less isolated, but only a little. Back in Denver, the fallout continued to spread. Morrison had been placed on administrative leave within hours of the incident. He hadn't been the primary aggressor, but he'd participated. He'd laughed. He'd gone along with Whitaker's mockery instead of questioning it, and in the eyes of TSA administration, that made him complicit. He sat in his apartment that evening, watching the news coverage with a growing sense of dread. The anchors discussed the incident with a mixture of outrage and fascination, replaying the footage in slow motion, freezing on Whitaker's sneering face and Lena's calm expression. One segment brought in a retired Army colonel to provide commentary. "What we're seeing here is a fundamental failure of judgment," the colonel said. "TSA agents are trained to identify threats, but they're also supposed to recognize legitimate credentials. The fact that this officer not only failed to verify the badge, but actively mocked it suggests either inadequate training or a deliberate abuse of authority." The anchor nodded. "And what about the response? Military personnel arriving within minutes, federal officials taking control of the situation. That seems unusual for a simple screening dispute." "It's not unusual if the person being detained has high-level clearance," the colonel replied. "What this tells me is that the woman in question was operating under Pentagon authorization, possibly as a contractor or consultant. The swift response indicates that someone very high up the chain of command was monitoring the situation and decided to intervene immediately. So she really was someone important." Without question, Morrison turned off the TV. His phone buzzed. A text from his union representative. "Don't talk to anyone, don't post anything, don't respond to media requests. We'll schedule a meeting tomorrow to discuss your options." Options? As if he had any. Morrison had worked for TSA for 6 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. He'd always followed the rules, always deferred to his supervisors, always done what he was told. And now, because he trusted Whitaker's judgment instead of his own instincts, his career was probably over. He thought about Lena's face during the confrontation, the way she'd stayed calm while they dumped her belongings on the table, the way she'd requested proper procedure and been ignored, the way she'd stood there, silent and still, while passengers filmed and laughed. She'd known. Even then, she'd known exactly how it would end, and she'd let them dig their own graves. Morrison felt sick. Mud. The next morning, Lena walked into the Pentagon at exactly 08:45. The building was as she remembered it, massive, imposing, designed to project strength and permanence. Security at the entrance was thorough but efficient. She presented her temporary credentials, submitted to a bag search and metal detector screening, and was escorted to the E-ring by a young Army lieutenant who looked like he'd graduated from West Point about 15 minutes ago. They walked through corridors that hummed with quiet activity. Officers moved with purpose. Civilians in business attire carried briefcases and tablets. Everything was orderly, controlled, precise. The lieutenant stopped outside a conference room with frosted glass doors. "They're waiting for you, ma'am," he said. Lena nodded her thanks and stepped inside. The room was set up for a classified briefing, soundproofed walls, secure communications equipment, no windows. 6 people sat around a rectangular table, and all of them looked up when she entered. She recognized 2 faces immediately. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, who'd overseen part of her unit's operations 5 years ago, and Dr. Michael Reeves, a trauma surgeon who'd worked with her team during a particularly brutal deployment in a region she still couldn't name publicly. The others were strangers, a mix of military medical personnel and DoD civilians with the kind of quiet competence that marked them as serious professionals. Hendricks stood and extended her hand. "Lena, good to see you again." They shook. Hendricks' grip was firm, her eyes sharp. She'd aged since their last meeting, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her eyes, but she carried herself with the same unshakable confidence. "Colonel," Lena said, "please sit. We've got a lot to cover." Lena took a seat at the table. Someone handed her a folder stamped with classification markers. She opened it and scanned the contents: technical specifications for new medical equipment, preliminary training protocols, analysis reports from recent field deployments. Hendricks cleared her throat. "Before we begin, I want to address the incident at the airport yesterday." Lena looked up. "It's been handled." "I know it's been handled. I'm the one who made the calls to get it handled." Hendricks leaned forward slightly. "But I want to make sure you understand that what happened was completely unacceptable. You were traveling under Pentagon authorization. You had legitimate credentials, and you were subjected to public humiliation by someone who had no business questioning your identity." "He was doing his job," Lena said evenly. "He just did it badly." "He did it with malice," Hendricks corrected. "There's a difference between thorough security screening and deliberate harassment. We've already filed a formal complaint with TSA administration. The individuals involved are facing disciplinary action. One of the civilians spoke up, a man in his 50s with DoD credentials clipped to his suit pocket. "We've also flagged your travel profile to prevent similar incidents in the future," he said. "You'll be listed as authorized personnel in the TSA database. Any attempt to detain or delay you will trigger immediate escalation protocols." Lena felt a flash of discomfort. She didn't want special treatment, didn't want to be marked as different or important. She'd left that world specifically to avoid the visibility that came with it. "That's not necessary," she said. "It's absolutely necessary," Hendricks replied. "You're consulting on classified projects. You're carrying sensitive materials, and you deserve to travel without being harassed by power-tripping agents who think everyone with a military badge is trying to scam the system." Lena wanted to argue, but she recognized the tone in Hendricks's voice. The decision had already been made. Arguing would accomplish nothing except wasting time. "Understood," she said instead. Hendricks nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now let's get to work." For the next 4 hours, they discussed trauma protocols with a level of technical detail that would have bored most people to tears. But Lena found herself engaged in a way she hadn't been in months. These were problems that mattered, questions that had real-world consequences, decisions that would directly impact whether soldiers lived or died in the field. She shared experiences from deployments she couldn't name, described situations where standard protocols had failed and improvisation had saved lives, offered suggestions for equipment modifications based on what she'd learned in environments where failure wasn't an option. The group listened with focused attention, taking notes, asking follow-up questions, challenging her assumptions in ways that sharpened the discussion rather than derailing it. By the time they broke for lunch, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Useful. While Lena worked in a classified Pentagon conference room, Whitaker sat in a coffee shop 3 miles from the airport staring at a laptop screen that displayed his professional obituary. The article had been published that morning by a national news website known for investigative journalism. It didn't use his full name, just Grant W., a TSA supervisor at Riverside International, but it included enough details that anyone who wanted to identify him could do so with minimal effort. The headline read, "TSA Agents' Viral Humiliation Exposes Larger Problems in Airport Security Culture." Whitaker read the piece with mounting horror. The incident, captured on multiple phones and viewed millions of times across social media platforms, has reignited debates about the balance between security and respect in airport screening procedures. While TSA agents face difficult and often thankless work, critics argue that the behavior displayed in the viral videos, mocking a passenger, confiscating legitimate credentials, and refusing to follow proper verification protocols, represents a systemic problem within the agency's culture. Sources close to the situation confirmed that the passenger in question was a former military medical specialist traveling under Pentagon authorization. The badge that the TSA supervisor dismissed as fake was, in fact, legitimate identification for personnel operating in classified capacities. The swift response by military officials and the subsequent suspension of the agents involved underscores the severity of the breach. But perhaps most troubling is the attitude displayed in the footage. The supervisor's mockery, his dismissive tone, his willingness to publicly humiliate someone based on assumptions rather than facts. These behaviors suggest a culture where authority is exercised without accountability. The article went on for another 1,000 words, interviewing security experts, former TSA employees, and civil rights advocates who all agreed that Whitaker's actions represented a broader problem. He closed the laptop. His phone rang. His lawyer. "Grant, we need to talk about next steps." "What next steps?" Whitaker's voice came out hollow. "I'm suspended. I'm under investigation. My face is all over the internet. What's left to discuss?" "Damage control," the lawyer said. "We need to get ahead of this before it gets worse." How could it possibly get worse? Federal prosecutors could decide to press charges. The woman you detained could file a civil lawsuit. TSA could terminate you for cause, which would affect your pension. And if any of those things happen, you'll need a strategy. Whitaker rubbed his eyes. What kind of strategy? Apology. Public statement expressing regret. Acknowledgement of mistakes. Maybe some community service or sensitivity training. Show remorse, show growth. Show that you've learned from this. You want me to apologize to her? I want you to salvage what's left of your career." Whitaker was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I was just doing my job." The lawyer sighed. "Grant, I say this as someone who's being paid to be on your side. You weren't doing your job. You were being an asshole, and now you're paying the price for it. The question is whether you want to keep paying that price or whether you want to start making it right." The line went dead. Whitaker sat in the coffee shop, surrounded by people who had no idea who he was, and tried to figure out when everything had gone so wrong. He'd been certain, absolutely certain. The woman had looked ordinary. The badge had looked suspicious. The situation had seemed straightforward, but he'd been wrong about all of it, and now the whole world knew. On the third day of Lena's consultation, something unexpected happened. She was in the middle of a technical presentation, demonstrating a new tourniquet design to a group of combat medics, when an assistant entered the conference room and handed Hendricks a note. Hendricks read it, frowned, and looked at Lena. "We need to pause for a moment," she said. The medics filed out, leaving Lena and Hendricks alone. "What's wrong?" Lena asked. Hendricks handed her the note. It was brief, printed on official letterhead. "Request from SECDEF Office, Ms. Hart, to provide testimony for Congressional Committee reviewing military medical preparedness. Hearing scheduled for Friday. Attendance strongly recommended." Lena's stomach sank. "Testimony? Apparently your expertise has been noticed at higher levels," Hendricks said. "The committee is looking at battlefield trauma response, and someone flagged you as a subject matter expert. I can't testify publicly about classified operations." "You won't have to. The hearing will be closed session, classified testimony only, but you'll be answering questions from senators who want to understand how medical protocols actually work in combat environments." Lena set the note down. "I left this world because I didn't want to be in the spotlight." "I know. This is the opposite of that." Hendricks's expression softened. "Lena, I understand your hesitation. But the work you did, the protocols you developed, the lives you saved, that knowledge matters. And right now, there are people making decisions about military medical funding who have no idea what actually happens in the field. They need to hear from someone who's been there. There are plenty of people who've been there. Not like you." Hendricks leaned forward. "You operated in conditions that most medics will never see. You developed techniques that are now saving lives across multiple theaters. And you did it all while working in a unit that officially doesn't exist. That gives you a perspective that no one else can provide." Lena looked out the window at the Pentagon courtyard below. She could see people moving between buildings, carrying briefcases and tablets, absorbed in whatever urgent matters filled their days. She'd walked away from all of this specifically to avoid moments like this. But Hendricks was right. The knowledge mattered. The experience mattered. And if testifying could help make sure the next generation of medics had better tools, better training, better support, then maybe it was worth stepping back into the light. "When's the hearing?" she asked quietly. "Friday morning, 0900. 2 days." Lena took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll do it." Hendricks smiled. "Thank you." As Lena walked back to her hotel that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. The airport incident had already put her face in front of millions of people. Now she'd be testifying before Congress, albeit in a closed session, but still. Her name would be in official records. Her expertise would be on file. Her anonymity would be completely shattered. She'd spent years trying to disappear. And in less than a week, she'd been dragged back into visibility whether she wanted it or not. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Hart, this is Marcus Doyle, the SEAL from the airport. I hope this isn't intrusive, but I wanted to reach out. I'm in DC for meetings this week. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? No agenda, just conversation." Lena stared at the message. She should ignore it, should delete it and move on. But something about the straightforward tone, the lack of pretense, the simple honesty of no agenda, just conversation, made her hesitate. She typed back, "How did you get this number?" The response came quickly. "Military channels, I asked JSOC for a way to contact you. They said you'd been briefed about my inquiry and cleared me to reach out if I kept it unofficial. Lena almost smiled. Of course, Collins had been monitoring communications. Of course, he decided that a Navy SEAL reaching out for coffee wasn't a security threat. She typed, "Tomorrow, 1600 hours, there's a place called Anchor Coffee, 2 blocks from the Pentagon. I'll be there." Lena put her phone away and kept walking, wondering what exactly she was getting herself into, but also wondering if maybe, just maybe, it would be nice to talk to someone who understood. Marcus arrived at Anchor Coffee 15 minutes early, a habit drilled into him by years of military punctuality. The place was small, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of neighborhood spot that survived on regulars rather than foot traffic. He ordered black coffee and took a table near the window where he could see the street. Ranger lay at his feet, relaxed but alert. At exactly 1600 hours, Lena walked through the door. She wore jeans and a navy blue jacket, her hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail from the airport. She spotted Marcus immediately, crossed the room without hesitation, and sat down across from him. "Chief Doyle?" "Ms. Hart." He gestured to the counter. "Can I get you something?" "I'm fine." They sat in silence for a moment, sizing each other up the way operators always did, reading posture, breathing, micro-expressions. Marcus saw controlled tension in her shoulders. Lena saw the same calculated assessment in his eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," Marcus said finally. "You were persistent." "I was curious." Lena's mouth curved slightly. "Curiosity can be dangerous. So can ignorance." She studied him for another beat, then seemed to make a decision. "What do you want to know?" Marcus leaned forward. "At the airport, Ranger responded to you like you were part of his operational chain. That doesn't happen by accident. K-9s don't acknowledge random civilians, so either you've worked extensively with military dogs or you've been trained to handle them in field environments." "Both," Lena said simply. "What unit?" "I can't tell you that." "Can't or won't?" "Does it matter?" Marcus considered this. "I suppose not, but I've been in the teams for 17 years. I've worked with just about every special operations unit in the DoD, and I've never seen a badge like yours. That's by design." "Who were you supporting? JSOC? CIA? Something else?" Lena's expression didn't change. "You know I can't answer that." "Then tell me what you can answer." She was quiet for a moment, weighing something internal. Then she said, "I was a trauma specialist attached to a unit that operated in denied areas, places where conventional medical support wasn't available. We developed protocols for treating combat injuries under conditions that would make most field hospitals look like luxury resorts." "Denied areas," Marcus repeated, "meaning hostile territory, no air support, no medevac." "Exactly." "How long?" 7 years. Marcus whistled softly. "That's a long time to operate in those conditions." "It was necessary work." "And now you're consulting for the Pentagon." "Trying to make sure the next generation doesn't have to learn the same lessons we did." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, processing. 7 years in denied territory meant Lena had been deployed to some of the most dangerous operational environments on the planet. The kind of places where casualties were expected and survival was optional. The kind of missions that never made the news because officially they never happened. "The TSA agent at the airport," Marcus said. "He had no idea what he was dealing with." "Most people don't." "Does that bother you?" Lena shook her head. "I chose to walk away from that world specifically so people wouldn't know. Anonymity is a gift, not a burden." "But now you're testifying before Congress." Her eyes sharpened. "How did you know about that?" "I didn't. You just confirmed it." Lena's jaw tightened, but there was no real anger in her expression, just acknowledgement that she'd been outmaneuvered. "You're good." "I've had practice." Marcus smiled slightly. "For what it's worth, I think it's important that people like you speak up. Most of the decision makers have no idea what actually happens downrange." "That's what Colonel Hendricks said." "She's right." Lena looked out the window at the traffic moving past. "I spent 7 years trying to save lives in places where death was the default outcome. I developed techniques that worked when nothing else did. And then I walked away because I was tired of watching people die despite everything I could do." Now they want me to stand in front of politicians and explain why we need better equipment, better training, better support, as if those things will somehow fix the fundamental problem. Which is? We keep sending people into situations where they shouldn't be. Marcus was quiet. He understood that sentiment more than most people would. He'd seen enough combat to know that no amount of training or equipment could eliminate the chaos and horror of real violence. The best you could do was prepare people to survive it. So why testify? He asked. Because the work still matters, Lena said softly. Even if I can't fix the big problems, I can maybe fix the small ones. Better tourniquets, faster blood products, smarter triage protocols, things that will give medics a fighting chance. That's enough. She looked at him. Is it? It has to be. They sat in silence for a while, two people who'd seen things most civilians couldn't imagine, finding unexpected common ground in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Pentagon. Ranger shifted at Marcus's feet and rested his head on Lena's shoe. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. He's a good dog. The best I've worked with. What's his specialty? Explosives detection, primarily, but he's cross-trained in patrol and apprehension. How many deployments? 2. Afghanistan both times. Lena nodded, understanding what that meant. He's earned his retirement. He's got a few more years in him first. Make sure they count. Marcus recognized the weight in that statement, the unspoken knowledge that time in the field was borrowed, not owned, that every deployment could be the last one, that the dogs, like the operators, gave everything they had until they couldn't anymore. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Problem? Lena asked. Message from Navi Spekwar. They want me at a briefing in 30 minutes. Then you should go. Marcus stood but hesitated. Can I ask you one more thing? You can ask? Do you regret any of it? The years in the field, the missions, the work? Lena considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. Marcus nodded. That's a good answer. He walked toward the door, Ranger following at his heels. At the threshold, he turned back. Good luck with the testimony. Good luck with the briefing. And then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with her coffee and her thoughts. The Congressional hearing room was smaller than Lena had expected. She'd imagined something grand, wood-paneled walls, raised dais, dramatic lighting. Instead, she found herself in a secure facility beneath the Capitol building, sitting at a plain table in front of 4 senators and a handful of military advisors. The room had no windows, no cameras, no public gallery. Just harsh fluorescent lighting and the faint hum of ventilation systems. Senator Margaret Caldwell, chair of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Military Readiness, sat in the center of the panel. She was in her mid-60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that came from decades of navigating Washington politics. Ms. Hart, thank you for agreeing to testify today, Caldwell began. We understand that your work has been conducted under classified parameters, and we want to assure you that this session is being held at the highest security level. Nothing you say here will be made public without your explicit consent. Lena nodded. I understand, Senator. For the record, can you state your professional background? I served as a combat trauma specialist for 7 years, attached to a classified unit conducting operations in denied areas. I developed and implemented medical protocols for treating battlefield injuries in environments without conventional support infrastructure. One of the other senators, a younger man named Patterson from Texas, leaned forward. Denied areas, you mean places where our forces weren't officially supposed to be? I mean places where conventional medical evacuation wasn't available, Lena replied carefully, whether for operational, geographical, or tactical reasons. Caldwell interrupted smoothly. Ms. Hart, we're not here to debate the politics of where our forces deploy. We're here to understand what medical support they need when they get there. Can you describe the conditions you operated in? Lena took a breath. In a typical deployment, a wounded soldier can expect medevac within the golden hour, the critical window for preventing shock and death from trauma. In the environments where my unit operated, that window didn't exist. We had casualties who couldn't be evacuated for 12 hours, sometimes 24. We had to keep people alive using whatever resources we could carry in a backpack. And what did that look like in practice? Patterson asked. It looked like performing emergency surgery in caves with headlamps. It looked like managing massive hemorrhage with improvised pressure dressings because we'd run out of commercial ones. It looked like keeping someone's airway open manually for 6 hours because we didn't have mechanical ventilation. It looked like making decisions about who could be saved and who couldn't. The room went silent. Caldwell's expression remained neutral, but her eyes reflected something deeper. And you did this for 7 years. Until I couldn't anymore. What changed? Lena hesitated. This was the part she'd been dreading, the part where she had to explain why she'd walked away without sounding like she'd quit, without diminishing the work that others were still doing. I lost someone I shouldn't have lost, she said quietly. A young operator, 19 years old, who took shrapnel to the femoral artery during an ambush. Textbook injury, textbook treatment. I did everything right. Tourniquet applied within seconds, pressure points controlled, bleeding stopped. But he went into shock anyway because we didn't have blood products. We didn't have IV fluids that could handle the ambient temperature. We didn't have the equipment we needed to keep him stable until extraction arrived. And he died, Caldwell said softly. He died because the protocols we'd been given were designed for environments that didn't match the reality we were operating in. Lena's voice remained steady, but her hands tightened on the table edge. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep doing this work and accept those limitations. Patterson spoke up. So you left. So I left, and I've spent the last 3 years trying to make sure the next generation of medics has better tools than I did. Caldwell exchanged glances with her colleagues. Ms. Hart, based on your experience, what would you recommend as the highest priority improvements to battlefield medical care? Lena had prepared for this question. She pulled out a tablet and brought up a presentation she'd compiled over the past 2 days. 3 things, she said. First, temperature-stable blood products that can be stored and transported in extreme environments. Current blood supplies degrade rapidly in heat or cold. We need alternatives that maintain viability regardless of conditions. She advanced to the next slide. Second, modular trauma systems that can be adapted to different operational requirements. Right now, medics carry standardized kits that work well in conventional environments, but fail in austere settings. We need scalable systems that can be configured based on mission parameters. Another slide. Third, advanced training that prepares medics for prolonged field care. Most combat lifesaver courses assume medevac within an hour. We need training that prepares people for 12-hour holds, 24-hour holds, situations where they're the only medical support available and they have to keep someone alive through sheer determination and improvisation. She set down the tablet. Those 3 changes would save more lives than any piece of equipment or any amount of funding, but they require acknowledging that our forces operate in environments that don't match our peacetime assumptions. Caldwell nodded slowly. And the cost? Minimal compared to what we're already spending. The real cost is cultural, accepting that we need to prepare for worst-case scenarios instead of hoping they won't happen. Patterson was taking notes. You mentioned developing new protocols during your deployment. Are those documented? Most of them are classified. Can they be declassified? Lena glanced at Colonel Hendricks, who was seated against the wall with the other military advisors. Hendricks gave a subtle nod. Some of them could be, Lena said, with appropriate redactions to protect operational details. I'd like to see that happen, Caldwell said. If your work can inform better training and better equipment, it needs to be available to the people making those decisions. Agreed. The hearing continued for another 90 minutes, covering everything from supply chain logistics to psychological resilience training. By the time Caldwell called for a recess, Lena felt drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. She stepped out into the hallway and found Hendricks waiting. You did well, Hendricks said. I talked about the kid we lost. You talked about why the work matters. That's what they needed to hear. Lena leaned against the wall. When I left the field, I told myself I was done with all of this. Done with the politics, done with the justifications, done with explaining why people die in situations we could prevent. But you're not done. Apparently not. Hendricks placed a hand on her shoulder. The work you did out there saved lives. The testimony you just gave will save more. You get to be frustrated about that. You get to hate that it's necessary, but you don't get to pretend it doesn't matter. Before Lena could respond, her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Turn on the news, now. She pulled out her phone and opened a news app. The top headline made her stomach drop. Breaking. TSA. Agent from viral airport incident found dead in apparent suicide. Lena's vision tunneled. Hendricks saw her expression change. What is it? Lena handed her the phone. Hendricks read the headline and swore quietly. Grant Whitaker? They're not naming him yet, but it has to be. The article contained minimal details, just that a TSA supervisor from Riverside International had been found dead in his home by family members. Authorities were investigating, but preliminary evidence suggested suicide. No note had been found. Lena felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd known the airport incident would have consequences. She'd expected investigations, suspensions, maybe even criminal charges. But she hadn't expected this. This isn't your fault, Hendricks said firmly. Isn't it? He made his own choices. He humiliated you in public. He refused to follow protocol. He faced the consequences of his actions. And now he's dead. Hendricks' expression tightened. Lena, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You traveled with legitimate credentials. You requested proper procedure. You stayed calm while he mocked you. What happened after that? The investigation, the media coverage, his response to all of it, that's on him, not you. Lena wanted to believe that, wanted to compartmentalize this the way she'd compartmentalized every other terrible thing she'd witnessed. But something about this felt different, more personal, more complicated. Her phone rang. Collins. Have you seen the news? He asked without preamble. Yes. We're getting calls from reporters asking for comment. I need to know if you want to make a statement. What kind of statement? Expressing condolences, acknowledging the tragedy, keeping it brief and neutral. Lena closed her eyes. I don't want to make a statement. That's fine. But the story's going to run with or without your input, and people are going to speculate about the connection between the airport incident and his death. I need to prepare you for that. I understand. Are you okay? The question caught her off guard. Collins was professional to a fault, the kind of intelligence officer who dealt in information and strategy, not emotional support. Hearing concern in his voice felt surreal. I'm fine, she said automatically. Lena, she took a breath. I will be fine. Call me if that changes. The line went dead. Hendricks was watching her carefully. You should go back to your hotel. Get some rest. The second session of the hearing isn't until Monday. I need to stay busy. You need to process this. Lena shook her head. If I process it, I'll start thinking about all the ways I could have handled the airport differently. All the ways I could have de-escalated. All the ways I could have prevented this. You couldn't have prevented this. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Hendricks' tone was sharp now. Because I've seen enough operators destroy themselves with survivor's guilt to recognize the pattern. You are not responsible for Grant Whitaker's choices. You are not responsible for his mental state. You are not responsible for his death. What you are responsible for is continuing to do the work that matters, which you've been doing, which you will continue doing. Lena met her eyes. Is that an order, Colonel? It's advice from someone who's been where you are. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lena's phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. I heard about the TSA agent. Are you okay? She stared at the message, surprised that he'd reached out, surprised that he'd made the connection, surprised that he cared enough to ask. She typed back, No, but I will be. His response came immediately. Coffee again? Same place, 30 minutes. Lena hesitated. She should go back to the hotel. Should take Hendricks' advice and process what had happened. Should give herself space to feel whatever she was feeling without an audience. But the thought of sitting alone in a hotel room, replaying the airport confrontation, and wondering if she could have changed the outcome felt unbearable. I'll be there, she typed. Marcus was already waiting when she arrived. This time, Ranger wasn't with him. probably back at whatever facility Marcus was staying in. The coffee shop was quieter than before, just a handful of customers scattered at different tables, absorbed in laptops and conversations. Lena sat down across from him without ordering anything. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "You looked like you needed to talk to someone who'd understand. And you think you understand." Marcus's expression was serious. "I've lost people. I've watched teammates die despite everything we did to save them. I've carried the weight of wondering if I could have done something different. So yeah, I think I understand." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He killed himself." "I know. Because of what happened at the airport." "You don't know that." "The timing's pretty clear." Marcus leaned forward. "The timing suggests a correlation. It doesn't prove causation. You don't know what else was happening in his life. You don't know what other pressures he was facing. You don't know if this was something he'd been struggling with for a long time. He humiliated me on camera, and then his life fell apart because of it." "He humiliated himself on camera," Marcus corrected. "You were just the person he chose to target. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else eventually. People who abuse authority don't do it once. They do it repeatedly until someone calls them out." Lena looked down at her hands. "I could have handled it differently." "How?" "I could have been more cooperative. Could have explained things better. Could have de-escalated instead of staying silent." "You requested proper protocol. He ignored you. You identified yourself with legitimate credentials. He mocked you. You stayed calm while he created a spectacle." Marcus's voice was firm. "You handled it exactly right. What happened after that? The investigation, the public reaction, his response? That's not on you." "Then why does it feel like it is?" "Because you're someone who takes responsibility for outcomes. That's what makes you good at what you do. But it also means you'll carry weight that isn't yours to carry." Lena met his eyes. "How do you deal with it? The weight?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I remind myself that I can only control my actions, not the consequences. I did my job. I made the best decisions I could with the information I had. And if the outcome wasn't what I wanted, that doesn't mean I failed. It just means the situation was bigger than any one person could fix." "That sounds like something you tell yourself to sleep at night." "It is. But it also happens to be true." They sat in silence, the sounds of the coffee shop filling the space between them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the scrape of chair legs against tile. Finally, Lena said, "I testified before Congress today." "How'd it go?" "Better than expected. They actually listened." "That's something." "I talked about a kid I lost, 19 years old, bled out because we didn't have the right equipment." Marcus's expression shifted. "I'm sorry." "It was 3 years ago. You'd think I'd be over it by now." "You never get over losing people. You just learn to carry it." Lena nodded. "That was exactly right. The weight didn't disappear. You just got stronger until you could bear it without collapsing." Her phone buzzed. Another news alert. Family of TSA agent releases statement. Grant was under immense pressure from public scrutiny. She read the first paragraph of the article. Whitaker's sister had spoken to reporters, describing him as a dedicated public servant who'd made a mistake and been destroyed by the viral nature of modern media. She called for compassion and understanding. She asked people to remember that behind every viral video was a real human being with a family and a life. Lena set the phone down. "They're making him the victim," she said quietly. Marcus glanced at the screen. "They're grieving. People say things when they're grieving. He humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. He called my service fake. He treated me like a criminal, and now I'm supposed to feel sorry for him? You don't have to feel anything, but you also don't have to let his family's grief become your burden." Lena stood abruptly. "I need to go." Marcus rose with her. "Lena, I appreciate you meeting me. I really do. But I can't sit here and talk about this anymore." "Then don't talk. Just listen for a second." She stopped. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "Whatever you're feeling right now, anger, guilt, frustration, grief, all of it is valid. But don't let it consume you. Don't let this incident define you. You're not the person who destroyed Grant Whitaker's career. You're the person who saved lives in impossible conditions. You're the person who developed protocols that will save more lives. You're the person who testified before Congress to make sure the next generation has better tools. That's who you are. Not this. Lena felt something crack in her chest. She'd spent 3 years building walls between herself and the work she'd done. 3 years trying to be normal. 3 years pretending that the weight of all those deployments, all those casualties, all those impossible decisions didn't still press down on her every single day. And in 1 week, those walls had crumbled completely. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do what?" "Be visible. Be recognized. Have my work matter in public instead of in secret." Marcus's expression softened. "Then don't do it alone. Find people who understand. Build a support system. Let people help carry the weight." "I'm not good at that." "Neither am I, but we're both still here. That counts for something." Lena nodded slowly. Then she reached out and squeezed his arm once, a brief gesture of gratitude. "Thank you." "Anytime." She walked out of the coffee shop and into the cool evening air, her mind still spinning but her breathing a little steadier. Across the city, in a hospital conference room, a group of military doctors reviewed the protocols Lena had submitted during her Pentagon consultation. One of them, a trauma surgeon named Dr. Ellis, who deployed 4 times, read through the documentation with growing amazement. "Where did she learn this?" Ellis asked. Colonel Hendricks, who joined the meeting remotely via video conference, smiled faintly. "In places you've never been. Doing things you can't imagine. This is revolutionary. The hemostatic techniques alone could change how we approach massive hemorrhage in austere environments." "That's why we brought her in." Another doctor looked up. "Is she available for follow-up consultations? We have questions." "She's scheduled to leave Washington on Monday after her final congressional session, but I can arrange for additional meetings if necessary." "Please do. This work is too important to let slip away." Hendricks made a note. "Consider it done." After the meeting ended, she sat alone in her Pentagon office, staring at the same news headline everyone else was seeing. Grant Whitaker's death had shifted the narrative in ways she hadn't anticipated. What had been a clear-cut case of TSA misconduct was now being reframed as a tragedy caused by public shaming and internet mob mentality. Some commentators were already calling for investigations into whether the military's response had been excessive, whether Lena should have been more forgiving, whether the punishment had fit the crime. Hendricks deleted 3 angry emails she'd drafted in response, and instead picked up her phone. She called a contact at the Department of Defense Public Affairs office. "We need to get ahead of this narrative," she said without preamble. "Grant Whitaker's death is tragic, but we cannot allow it to overshadow the misconduct that triggered the investigation. The woman he targeted did nothing wrong. The response was appropriate, and we will not apologize for protecting authorized personnel." "Understood," the contact replied. "We'll prepare a statement emphasizing that while we express condolences to Whitaker's family, the original incident involved serious breaches of protocol that required immediate intervention. Make it clear that this wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability." "Will do." Hendricks ended the call and turned to her computer, pulling up Lena's file. The woman had been through more than most people could survive. She'd earned the right to walk away from public scrutiny, but the world wasn't going to let her. Not after the airport, not after the testimony, not now that people knew she existed. Hendricks made another note. "Recommend extended security monitoring for L. Hart. Potential media harassment likely to escalate." Then she closed the file and went back to work, doing what she could to protect someone who'd spent years protecting others. Late that night, Lena sat in her hotel room, staring at her laptop screen. The news coverage had evolved throughout the evening. More details about Whitaker's life had emerged: financial struggles, a recent divorce, complaints from coworkers about his aggressive management style. The picture being painted was complex and human and deeply sad, but it didn't change what he'd done. Lena closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed one more time, a message from a blocked number. "You killed him." Her heart rate spiked. She sat up, staring at the screen. Another message. "You think you're a hero? You destroyed a man's life for doing his job." Then another. "I hope you're happy. His blood is on your hands. The messages kept coming, each one angrier than the last, each one accusing her of crimes she hadn't committed. Lena's hands shook as she blocked the number, but within seconds, a new number appeared with the same messages. Then another, and another. Someone had organized a harassment campaign, flooding her phone with threats and accusations. Her private number, the one that should have been secure, had been compromised. She called Collins. He answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "Someone's flooding my phone with threatening messages, multiple numbers, coordinated." Collins swore. "Send me screenshots. I'll trace the source and escalate to cybercrimes." "How did they get my number?" "I don't know yet, but we'll find out." Lena sent the screenshots and then powered off her phone completely. She sat in the silent hotel room, feeling the walls close in. This was supposed to be over. The airport incident was supposed to be a minor inconvenience, handled quickly and forgotten. But instead, it had metastasized into something she couldn't control. Whitaker was dead. His family was grieving. The public was divided. And now someone was actively targeting her with coordinated harassment. The quiet life she'd tried to build was gone, and she had no idea how to get it back. A knock at the door made her jump. She approached cautiously, checking the peephole. Marcus stood in the hallway, Ranger at his side. She opened the door. "How did you know where I was staying?" "Collins called me, said you might need someone nearby." Lena almost laughed. "He sent you to babysit me?" "He sent me to make sure you weren't alone." Marcus's expression was serious. "Can we come in?" She stepped aside. Marcus entered with Ranger, who immediately did a sweep of the room, trained behavior, checking for threats. When he was satisfied, the dog sat down near the window. "Collins is handling the harassment campaign," Marcus said. "He's also arranging for a security detail to monitor your hotel tonight." "I don't need a security detail. Someone just threatened you with multiple coordinated messages. You absolutely need a security detail." Lena sank onto the edge of the bed. "This is insane. All I did was travel with legitimate credentials. All you did was expose someone who'd been abusing authority for years. And now his supporters are lashing out because they can't accept that he was wrong." "He's dead, Marcus." "I know, and that's tragic, but it doesn't change the facts." Lena looked up at him. "Why are you here? Really?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly the same situation, but close enough. After a deployment went bad, I had families of fallen soldiers blaming me for decisions I made in the field. They needed someone to be angry at, and I was the ranking officer. I got death threats, hate mail. People showed up at my house. It was hell." "What did you do?" "I let the system handle it. I trusted the people whose job it was to protect me. And eventually the noise died down. But it took time. And it took accepting that some people were always going to believe I was the villain, no matter what the facts said." Lena rubbed her face. "I just want to do my work and be left alone." "I know, but that's not an option right now." "So what do I do?" "You let Collins handle security, you finish your testimony on Monday, you go home and let the investigators do their jobs, and you remember that this will pass." "Will it?" Marcus sat down beside her on the bed. "Yeah, it will. The news cycle moves fast. Something else will capture attention. Whitaker's family will grieve privately. The harassment will fade, and you'll still be here, doing work that matters." Lena wanted to believe him, but sitting in that hotel room with threatening messages still fresh in her mind and the weight of Whitaker's death pressing down on her chest, belief felt impossible. Ranger walked over and rested his head on her knee. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for the simple, uncomplicated affection of a dog who didn't care about viral videos or congressional testimony or public opinion. Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked it and frowned. "What now?" Lena asked. "Collins found the source of the harassment. It's a coordinated campaign organized through social media. Supporters of Whitaker who think you're responsible for his death. They're calling themselves Justice for Grant, and they're planning to escalate." "Escalate how?" "Protests, media campaigns, attempts to identify and shame you publicly." Lena felt something inside her harden. "Let them try." Marcus looked at her sharply. "That's not the right response." "What is?" "Staying silent, staying safe, letting the professionals handle it." I've spent 3 years staying silent. I'm done. Lena, she stood abruptly. No, I'm not going to hide while people blame me for a man's suicide. I'm not going to let them rewrite what happened at that airport. And I'm not going to apologize for having legitimate credentials and requesting proper protocol. No one's asking you to apologize. They're asking me to disappear, to be quiet, to let them control the narrative. Lena's voice was steel now. I walked away from the field because I was tired of war. But this is different. These people are attacking me for doing nothing wrong, and I'm not going to let them win. Marcus stood as well. Then what's your plan? Lena pulled out her laptop and opened it. The screen showed her email inbox, hundreds of messages from reporters requesting interviews, producers asking for statements, journalists offering platforms to tell her story. She'd been deleting them all day. Now she selected one. A producer from a major news network who'd promised fair coverage and editorial control. She hit reply and typed, "I'm ready to talk." Marcus read over her shoulder and his jaw tightened. "Are you sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She hit send before she could change her mind. Then she turned to face Marcus, her expression resolved. "If they want a villain," she said quietly, "I'll show them what a real operator looks like." And somewhere across the city, in a control room monitored by intelligence analysts and federal investigators, Collins received an alert that Lena Hart had just made direct contact with national media. He stared at the notification for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that would change everything. The call Collins made went to a direct line in the Pentagon that only 12 people in the entire Department of Defense had access to. It rang once. Baker. General David Baker, Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence, had spent 30 years managing situations that required discretion, speed, and absolute precision. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen every possible crisis and learned to navigate them all. "Sir, this is Collins. We have a situation developing with the Hart matter. I'm aware. I've been monitoring the coverage. She's decided to go public, just agreed to an interview with national media." There was a pause. "When?" "Producer is reaching out now to schedule, likely within 48 hours. Another pause, longer this time. "What's her mental state?" "Stable, but angry. She's being harassed by organized groups blaming her for Whitaker's death. She wants to control the narrative before it controls her." Baker's voice sharpened. "And you think letting her do a media interview is the right move?" "I think stopping her would be worse. She's not active duty. We can't order her to stay silent. And if we try, she'll interpret it as us protecting our own reputation at her expense." "Which would be accurate." "Yes, sir." Baker was quiet for a moment. Collins could hear the faint sound of paper shuffling in the background, the general processing multiple layers of consequence simultaneously. "What does she plan to say?" Baker asked. "I don't know yet. But based on her testimony this morning and her current state of mind, she's going to tell the truth. All of it. Within the bounds of her security clearances, but without holding back on the details that matter. The details about what Whitaker did, and about what she's done, who she is, why her credentials were legitimate, why the military response was appropriate." Baker exhaled slowly. "If she reveals operational details, she won't. She's too disciplined for that. But she will make it clear that she's not some random civilian pretending to be important. She'll establish her credibility in ways that will make Whitaker's family and supporters look foolish. And that helps us how? It shifts the narrative from military overreach caused a man's suicide to decorated veteran was publicly humiliated by abusive TSA officer. It puts the focus back where it belongs." Baker considered this. "What do you need from me?" "Authorization to provide her with media support, public affairs liaison, legal review of her statements, security detail during and after the interview, and clearance to declassify portions of her service record to back up her claims." "Declassify her record?" Baker's tone was flat. "You understand what you're asking. I understand that she's about to go public with or without our support. If we help her, we control what gets revealed. If we don't, she'll improvise. And improvisation with someone of her background could expose things neither of us wants exposed." Baker was silent for nearly 30 seconds. Then, "Approved. But Collins, if this goes sideways, it's on both of us." "Understood, sir." The line went dead. Collins immediately opened his secure laptop and began drafting protocols. Media liaison assigned within the hour. Legal team briefed by morning. Declassification review expedited through channels that normally took weeks, but could be compressed to hours when the right people made the right calls. He sent a message to Lena. You have DoD support. Media team will contact you within 60 minutes. Do not finalize anything until they've reviewed. Her reply came back instantly. I already finalized it. Interview scheduled for tomorrow evening. Live broadcast. Collins closed his eyes and swore. Live broadcast meant no editing, no second chances, no ability to walk back statements or clarify misunderstandings. Whatever Lena said would be out there permanently, dissected by millions of people with their own agendas and interpretations. He typed back, "We need to prepare you. Talking points, media training, legal boundaries. I've been interrogated by people a lot scarier than journalists. I'll be fine." Lena, this is different. I know, that's why I'm doing it. Collins stared at the screen, recognizing the stubborn determination in those words. He'd seen it before in operators who'd made decisions under fire and refused to second-guess themselves afterward. Once they committed to a course of action, changing their minds required evidence that they were fundamentally wrong. And Lena wasn't wrong. She'd been humiliated publicly. She'd been blamed for a man's death. She'd been harassed and threatened. And now she was fighting back the only way she knew how, by controlling the terrain and forcing her opponents to fight on her terms. Collins sent one more message. Security team will be outside your hotel by 0600. Don't leave without them. This time, she didn't argue. The news broke at midnight. Viral TSA incident subject agrees to exclusive interview. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. Social media exploded with speculation. Supporters of the Justice for Grant movement promised to watch and expose her lies. Military communities rallied behind her, demanding that she be given a fair platform. News analysts scheduled emergency segments to discuss the implications. And in a quiet suburb outside Denver, Whitaker's sister Catherine sat in her living room, reading the headline with tears streaming down her face. Her brother was dead. Buried that afternoon in a small ceremony attended by family and a handful of co-workers who'd remained loyal despite everything. The funeral had been private, closed to media, but reporters had still gathered outside the cemetery, filming the procession and asking questions that Catherine couldn't answer. Now the woman who'd triggered all of this was going on national television. Catherine's husband, James, sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. You don't have to watch it, he said quietly. Yes, I do. It's just going to make you angrier. I'm already angry, Catherine wiped her eyes. Grant made a mistake. One mistake. And now he's dead and she gets to go on TV and justify it. James was quiet. He'd tried to have this conversation with Catherine multiple times over the past week, tried to gently suggest that maybe Grant's problems had been deeper than one viral incident, that the divorce had hit him hard, that the financial struggles had been mounting for months, that the complaints from co-workers suggested a pattern of behavior that couldn't be blamed on a single bad day. But grief didn't respond to logic, and Catherine needed someone to blame. She's going to try to make herself look like a victim, Catherine said. She's going to talk about her service and her credentials and act like Grant was some kind of monster for doing his job. We don't know what she's going to say. I know exactly what she's going to say. I've seen the comments online. People calling Grant a bully, calling him incompetent, saying he deserved what happened, as if losing your career and your reputation and your will to live is an appropriate punishment for one mistake. James pulled her closer. I'm sorry. Catherine leaned into him, exhausted and broken and furious all at once. I just want this to be over. But it wasn't over. Not even close. But the next morning, Lena met with the DoD media team in a secure conference room at the Pentagon. There were 4 of them. A public affairs specialist named Rachel Torres, a legal advisor named Commander Phil Warren, a media trainer named David Kim, and Collins himself, who sat at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Torres started the briefing. First, let's establish boundaries. You're cleared to discuss general aspects of your service, that you worked as a combat trauma specialist in classified operations. You can mention that you develop medical protocols now used by DoD. You can describe the conditions you operated in without naming specific locations or missions. What you cannot do is reveal operational details, unit designations, or anything that could compromise ongoing security. Lena nodded. I understand. Warren leaned forward. We've drafted talking points for the most likely questions. Who are you? Why were you at the airport? What happened during the screening? How do you respond to accusations that military intervention was excessive? I'm not using talking points. Warren blinked. I'm sorry? I'm not going on camera and reciting prepared statements. That's exactly what people expect. They'll see through it immediately. Torres exchanged glances with Kim. Ms. Hart, media training exists for a reason. Interviews can be hostile environments. Journalists will try to catch you off guard, twist your words, push you into saying things you'll regret. Talking points keep you on message. I spent 7 years operating in hostile environments where the enemy was actively trying to kill me, Lena replied calmly. I think I can handle a journalist asking difficult questions. Kim spoke up, his tone measured. This isn't about whether you can handle it. It's about making sure you come across the way you want to come across. Body language, tone, pacing, these things matter on camera. One wrong expression and you'll be memed into oblivion. Let them meme me, as long as the facts are clear. Collins finally spoke. Lena, these people are trying to help you. I know, and I appreciate it, but I'm not going to sanitize what happened. Whitaker humiliated me because he assumed I was nobody. He mocked my credentials because he couldn't imagine they were real. And when he found out he was wrong, he couldn't handle the consequences. That's the truth. And I'm going to say it exactly like that. Warren looked uncomfortable. You realize that framing could be seen as victim blaming. Victim blaming? Lena's voice hardened. I was the one standing at that checkpoint being called a fraud in front of hundreds of people. I was the one who had my belongings dumped on a table like evidence at a crime scene. I was the one who requested proper protocol and was ignored. Whitaker wasn't a victim. He was someone who abused his authority and faced the consequences. He's also dead, Torres said quietly, and that's tragic. I'm not going to celebrate it, but I'm also not going to pretend that his death erases what he did. The room fell silent. Collins studied Lena carefully, recognizing something in her expression that he'd seen in other operators who'd reached a breaking point. Not anger, not recklessness, but clarity. The kind of absolute certainty that came from finally understanding exactly what needed to be done and refusing to compromise. All right, Collins said. We'll support whatever approach you choose, but we need one guarantee from you. What's that? If the interview goes off the rails, if the journalist ambushes you with information you weren't expecting, if they violate the agreed terms, if you feel the situation becoming dangerous, you shut it down. Immediately. No hesitation. We'll handle the fallout. Lena met his eyes. Agreed. Torres pulled out a folder. The interview is with Sarah Chen from... I thought I said no one named Chen, Lena interrupted, then caught herself. Sorry, wrong context. Continue. Torres looked confused, but continued. Sarah Mitchell from Newsnight America. She's known for tough but fair interviews. We've reviewed her past work, and she tends to stick to agreed parameters. You'll have 30 minutes of airtime, conducted live with minimal commercial breaks. What's she likely to ask? Everything. Your background, the airport incident, Whitaker's death, the harassment campaign, your testimony before Congress. She'll want details on all of it. Good. So do I. Kim handed her a packet of research. This is everything we've compiled on public reaction to the airport incident. Sentiment analysis, trending topics, key influencers on both sides. You should understand the landscape before you walk into that studio. Lena took the packet but didn't open it. I don't need to know what people think. I need to tell them what actually happened. Warren tried one more time. Ms. Hart, please consider using at least some prepared language for the most sensitive topics. One misstatement about Whitaker's death could trigger legal action from his family. Then they can sue me. I'm not going to lie to protect their feelings. Collins stood. Everyone out. I need 5 minutes with Ms. Hart alone. The team filed out without argument. When the door closed, Collins turned to Lena with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're angry, he said. Yes, And you want to make them pay. I want to tell the truth. Those aren't the same thing. Lena stood as well, meeting him eye to eye. Collins, I've spent 3 years being quiet, 3 years being invisible, 3 years letting people make assumptions about who I am and what I've done. And in 1 week, all of that got ripped away. My face is viral. My name is public. People are sending me death threats. Whitaker's family is blaming me for his suicide. And everyone seems to have forgotten that the only thing I did was travel with legitimate credentials and ask for proper protocol. I haven't forgotten. Then let me do this my way. Collins was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, the general cleared declassification of portions of your service record. If you want credibility, we can provide documentation that will shut down any questions about your background. Lena's eyes widened slightly. How much did he clear? Enough. Unit affiliation stays classified, but your deployments, commendations, medical innovations, all of that can be confirmed publicly. And you're willing to do that? We're willing to support someone who served with distinction and is now being attacked for it. Yes. Lena felt something shift in her chest. She'd expected resistance, expected the DoD to prioritize its own interests over hers, expected to fight this battle alone. But Collins was offering her ammunition. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. This documentation will make you even more visible. Once people know what you've done, you'll never be anonymous again. Are you ready for that? Lena thought about the quiet life she'd tried to build. The hospital shifts where she was just another nurse. The apartment where she was just another resident. The grocery store trips where she was just another customer. All of that was already gone. I'm ready, she said. Collins nodded once. Then let's make sure they never forget what you did for this country. The interview was scheduled for 8 p.m. Eastern Time. By 7:30, Lena sat in the Newsnight America studio, a makeup artist touching up her face while technical crew adjusted lighting and audio. The set was designed to look intimate. 2 chairs angled toward each other, a neutral backdrop, soft lighting that was meant to make guests feel comfortable but actually created an environment where every micro-expression would be captured in high definition. Sarah Mitchell entered from stage right, extending her hand with a professional smile. Ms. Hart, thank you for doing this. They shook. Mitchell was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of polished presence that came from years in front of cameras. She'd built a reputation on interviews that were probing without being exploitative, tough without being cruel. Call me Lena. Sarah. Mitchell sat down in her chair and reviewed notes on a tablet. We've got a lot to cover in 30 minutes. I want to give you space to tell your story, but I also need to ask the difficult questions. Fair enough? Fair enough. And just to confirm, you understand this is live? No edits, no do-overs. I understand. Mitchell studied her for a moment. You seem calm. I am. Most people would be nervous. I've done harder things. Mitchell smiled faintly. I believe that. All right, we go live in 3 minutes. Last chance to back out. Lena shook her head. I'm not backing out. The floor director counted down. Lights adjusted. Cameras moved into position. And then the red light blinked on. They were live. Mitchell turned to camera 1 with practiced ease. Good evening. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and tonight we have an exclusive interview with Lena Hart, the woman at the center of a viral airport security incident that has sparked national debate about TSA procedures, military credentials, and the consequences of public shaming. Ms. Hart, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me. Let's start at the beginning. Who are you? Lena took a breath. I'm a former combat trauma specialist who spent 7 years deployed in classified operations. I developed medical protocols for treating battlefield injuries in environments where conventional support wasn't available. After I left the field, I worked as a civilian nurse and recently began consulting for the Department of Defense on military medical preparedness. And you were traveling to Washington for that consultation when the airport incident occurred. Correct. Mitchell leaned forward slightly. Walk us through what happened at that checkpoint. Lena's voice remained steady. I was going through standard security screening at Riverside International. My bag contained medical equipment, trauma supplies, surgical instruments, emergency medications, all properly documented and registered. When the scanner flagged the density of the items, I requested that a medical supervisor be present during inspection. That request was denied. By TSA Officer Grant Whitaker. Yes. He began removing items from my bag and displaying them on the inspection table. When he found my military identification, he assumed it was fake. He mocked it publicly, called it stolen valor, and ordered airport police to detain me for impersonating military personnel. But your credentials were legitimate. Completely legitimate. The badge he confiscated was authentic military identification for personnel operating under Pentagon authorization. Within minutes of military officials being notified, federal personnel arrived to verify my identity and assume custody of the situation. Mitchell paused, letting that sink in for viewers. How did you feel while this was happening? Frustrated, but not surprised. Why not surprised? Lena chose her words carefully. People make assumptions based on appearance. I don't look like what most people imagine when they think of military personnel. I was dressed casually, I was tired, I didn't fit the stereotype. Officer Whitaker saw someone he assumed was trying to scam the system, and he acted on that assumption without verifying the facts. Some people would call that profiling. I'd call it poor judgment. Mitchell's expression sharpened. Officer Whitaker died by suicide less than a week after the incident. His family has stated publicly that he was destroyed by the media attention and public shaming that followed. How do you respond to that? This was the moment Lena had been preparing for. The question that would define how millions of people perceived both her and Whitaker. She met Mitchell's eyes directly. Grant Whitaker's death is a tragedy. I don't celebrate it. I don't minimize it. And I'm genuinely sorry for the pain his family is experiencing. But his death doesn't erase what he did. He didn't make one small mistake. He created a spectacle. He mocked my service in front of hundreds of people. He confiscated legitimate credentials and called them fake. He ordered my detention based on assumptions rather than facts. And when military officials arrived to correct the situation, he was suspended because his actions violated TSA policy and federal law. His family says the punishment didn't fit the crime. The punishment was an investigation. That's standard procedure when an agent violates protocol. What happened after that? The media coverage, the public reaction, his personal response. Those were consequences of his choices, not the investigation itself. Mitchell pressed harder. But you acknowledge that the viral nature of the incident amplified those consequences. Yes. And I also acknowledge that I didn't post those videos. I didn't create the hashtags. I didn't organize the social media campaigns. Passengers recorded what happened and shared it because they thought it was newsworthy. That's not my responsibility. Some would argue you could have asked people not to share the videos. Lena's voice hardened slightly. I was being detained by airport police. I didn't have the authority to ask anything of anyone. And frankly, I'm glad the videos were shared. They provided documentation of what actually happened, which protected me from false accusations and ensured accountability. Mitchell studied her for a moment. You sound angry. I am angry. I was humiliated publicly for doing nothing wrong. I've been harassed and threatened by people who decided I was responsible for Officer Whitaker's death without knowing any of the facts. And I'm being asked to feel guilty for defending myself. Are you saying you have no regrets? Lena paused. This was the trap. The question designed to make her sound callous if she said no, or weak if she said yes. She chose truth. I regret that the situation happened at all. I regret that Officer Whitaker felt so much pressure that he took his own life. I regret that his family is grieving, but I don't regret having legitimate credentials. I don't regret requesting proper protocol, and I don't regret the fact that when someone in authority abused that authority, there were consequences. Mitchell nodded slowly. Let's talk about your background. You mentioned you served for 7 years in classified operations. Can you elaborate? Within the bounds of security clearances, yes. I was a combat medic attached to a unit that operated in denied areas, places where conventional medical support wasn't available. We treated casualties in conditions that would be unimaginable to most people. Caves, deserts, mountains, anywhere our forces needed medical expertise and couldn't access traditional field hospitals. And you developed new protocols during this time? Yes. Techniques for managing massive hemorrhage, performing emergency surgery with minimal equipment, keeping people alive for extended periods without evacuation. Those protocols are now being used by DoD to train the next generation of combat medics. Mitchell leaned back slightly. So when Officer Whitaker looked at your badge and called it fake, he was dismissing someone who'd spent years saving lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He was dismissing someone he'd decided wasn't worth believing. Because you didn't look the part. Exactly. Mitchell turned to camera 2. We'll be right back with more from Lena Hart after this break. The red light blinked off. Lena exhaled slowly. The first segment had gone exactly as she'd planned, establishing credibility, addressing Whitaker's death head-on, refusing to accept unearned guilt. Mitchell's assistant approached and handed them both water. You're doing well, Mitchell said quietly. The social media response is overwhelmingly in your favor. I don't care about social media. You should. It's driving the narrative. Before Lena could respond, the floor director counted down again. They were back. Mitchell opened the second segment with a harder edge. Lena, you've received death threats since this incident became public. Tell us about that. I've received hundreds of threatening messages from people who believe I'm responsible for Grant Whitaker's suicide. They've coordinated harassment campaigns, flooded my phone with accusations, and organized protests demanding that I be held accountable. How does that make you feel? It makes me understand why people don't speak up when they're mistreated. The cost of defending yourself publicly can be enormous, but I'm not willing to stay silent. Even if it means more harassment? Even then. Mitchell shifted topics. You testified before Congress yesterday in a closed session. Can you tell us what that was about? I was asked to provide expert testimony on battlefield medical preparedness, specifically on the gaps between the equipment and training our medics receive and the realities they face in combat environments. And what did you tell them? Lena's expression grew more serious. I told them about a 19-year-old operator who died in my arms because we didn't have temperature-stable blood products. I told them about performing surgery in caves with headlamps because we didn't have better options. I told them that the protocols we're using were designed for peacetime assumptions that don't match operational reality. And I told them that if they're going to send people into combat, they have a moral obligation to give them the tools they need to survive. The studio was completely silent. Mitchell's voice was soft. That must have been difficult testimony to give. It was necessary. And the committee listened? They listened. Whether they'll act on it remains to be seen. Mitchell paused, then asked the question Lena had been waiting for. There are people watching right now who think you're being too harsh on Officer Whitaker's memory, that you should show more compassion for someone who made a mistake and paid the ultimate price. What would you say to them? Lena looked directly into the camera. I would say that compassion doesn't require me to lie. Grant Whitaker made choices that violated policy and humiliated someone publicly. When those choices had consequences, he made another choice. I'm sorry he's dead, but I won't accept responsibility for decisions I didn't make, and I won't be silent while people rewrite what actually happened to protect his reputation. She paused, then continued. I spent 7 years in places where mistakes got people killed, where poor judgment meant your teammates didn't come home, where accountability wasn't optional, it was survival. Grant Whitaker worked in an airport, not a war zone. But the principle is the same. When you have authority, you have responsibility. And when you abuse that authority, there are consequences. Mitchell studied her. Some would call that a harsh worldview. Some would call it realistic. Fair enough. Mitchell checked her notes. Final question. What happens now? Where do you go from here? Lena took a breath. I finished my consultation with the Pentagon. I continue working to improve military medical protocols. And I go back to my life with the understanding that anonymity isn't an option anymore. But I'm okay with that, because if being visible means that other people won't be treated the way I was treated at that checkpoint, then it's worth it. Lena Hart, thank you for your time and your service. Thank you. The red light blinked off. The interview was over. Mitchell stood and shook Lena's hand again. That was powerful. You're going to get a lot of reactions. I'm prepared. As Lena left the studio, Collins was waiting in the hallway with Torres and Warren. How bad is it? Lena asked. Torres checked her phone and smiled. Actually, it's good, really good. Social media sentiment is running 70-30 in your favor. The clips are already going viral with supportive commentary. Military communities are rallying. Even some of Whitaker's initial supporters are backing off after hearing your side. Warren nodded. You threaded the needle. You acknowledged his death without accepting blame. You defended yourself without attacking his family, and you established credibility in ways that will be very difficult to dispute. Collins was the only one who looked concerned. The Justice for Grant group is already organizing counter-responses. They're planning protests outside the Pentagon and threatening to file complaints with DOD about your statements. Lena shrugged. Let them protest. They're also threatening legal action. On what grounds? Defamation. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. They're claiming your interview caused additional harm to the family. Warren shook his head. Those claims won't hold up. Everything you said was factual and protected opinion, but they can tie you up in litigation for months. Lena felt tired suddenly, not from the interview, but from the endless cycle of attack and defense that showed no signs of stopping. What do you recommend? She asked Collins. We wait. Let the public reaction play out over the next 48 hours. If sentiment continues to shift in your favor, the harassment groups will lose steam. If it doesn't, we escalate security and prepare for a longer fight. And Whitaker's family? Collins' expression softened. They're grieving. Give them space. Don't respond to their statements unless they directly threaten legal action. Lena nodded. As they walked toward the parking garage, Torres's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her eyes widened. What? Collins asked. TSA just released a statement. She read it aloud. Following comprehensive review of the incident involving Officer Grant Whitaker and passenger Lena Hart, TSA has determined that Officer Whitaker violated multiple agency policies regarding credential verification, passenger treatment, and escalation protocols. While we acknowledge Officer Whitaker's years of service and express condolences to his family, we must also affirm that the military response to this incident was appropriate and necessary. Ms. Hart's credentials were legitimate, her requests for proper protocol were reasonable, and the intervention by federal officials was warranted. TSA is implementing additional training to prevent similar incidents in the future. Lena stopped walking. They just validated everything you said, Torres continued, officially, on the record. Warren smiled. That's the ball game. If TSA is acknowledging Whitaker violated policy and the military response was appropriate, the harassment groups have no legs to stand on. Collins looked at Lena. How do you feel? She thought about it. Relief? Vindication? Satisfaction? Mostly she just felt exhausted. I feel like I can finally breathe, she said. They reached the car where her security detail was waiting. As Lena climbed into the back seat, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Watch the interview. You were incredible. Ranger sends his regards. She smiled and typed back. Tell him I owe him a steak. Another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. Thank you for telling the truth. My daughter is a combat medic. She needed to hear someone speak up. Retired Army Colonel. Then another. You made me cry. Thank you for your service. Gold Star Mother. Then dozens more, flooding her phone faster than she could read them. Support, gratitude, recognition, from people who understood. Oh. Lena closed her eyes and let the messages pile up unread. Tomorrow she'd respond. Tomorrow she'd process all of it. Tonight, she just needed to rest. 3 days later, Catherine Whitaker sat in her lawyer's office, staring at a television screen showing clips from Lena's interview. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Ross who specialized in wrongful death cases, paused the video. I've reviewed everything, Ross said carefully. The interview, the TSA statement, the timeline of events. And I need to be honest with you, a lawsuit against Ms. Hart would be very difficult to win. Catherine's hands tightened on the armrests. She said Grant abused his authority. She made it sound like he deserved what happened. She said he violated policy and faced appropriate consequences, and TSA confirmed that assessment. Legally, those are statements of fact, not defamation. What about emotional distress? She knew her statements would hurt our family. Ross shook her head. Truth is an absolute defense. Even if her statements caused distress, they were factual and made in response to public accusations. A court would almost certainly side with her. So we just let her win? Ross's expression softened. Catherine, I understand your pain, but sometimes there isn't a legal remedy for grief. Your brother made mistakes. Those mistakes had consequences. And while his death is tragic, it doesn't create liability for the people who reported what happened. Catherine felt tears burning. This isn't fair. I know. Grant was struggling. The divorce destroyed him. The financial problems were overwhelming him. And then this happened, and it pushed him over the edge. Why doesn't that matter? It does matter, but it doesn't change the facts of what occurred at that checkpoint. And it doesn't make Ms. Hart responsible for his response to those facts. Catherine stood abruptly. I can't accept that. Ross stood as well. Then you need to find another lawyer, because I won't take your money for a case I can't win. Catherine walked out without another word. She sat in her car in the parking garage, her brother's suicide note in her purse. She'd read it 100 times, searching for answers that weren't there. The note was brief, just 3 sentences. I'm sorry, I can't fix this. Tell them I tried. No explanation, no blame, no closure, just the desperate words of someone who'd run out of options. Catherine pulled out her phone and opened the Justice for Grant social media group. 10,000 members now, all united in their belief that Lena Hart had destroyed an innocent man. But reading through the comments, Catherine noticed something shifting. Before the interview, the posts had been angry and certain, demanding justice, calling for accountability. Now, the tone was more defensive. People arguing with outsiders who'd seen the interview and changed their minds. People insisting that Whitaker had been a good man despite the evidence. People clinging to a narrative that was rapidly falling apart. Catherine posted a message. We can't give up. Grant deserves to be remembered as more than a viral villain. The responses were immediate, but fewer than before. And several of them were from new accounts challenging her version of events. She closed the app. And for the first time since her brother's death, Catherine allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Grant really had been in the wrong. That thought hurt more than anything else. Because if he'd been wrong, then his death had been for nothing. Just a tragedy born from pride, poor judgment, and the inability to accept consequences. And there was no one left to blame for that, except Grant himself. Back in Washington, Lena's final day of Pentagon consultation ended with a surprise. Colonel Hendricks called her into a private office where General Baker was waiting via secure video conference. Ms. Hart, Baker said, his image displayed on a large monitor, I wanted to thank you personally for your testimony and your public statements. Both required courage that most people don't possess. Thank you, sir. I also wanted to inform you that based on your consultation this week, DoD is moving forward with several of your recommendations. Temperature-stable blood products are being fast-tracked for field testing. Modular trauma systems are entering the procurement pipeline, and we're revising combat lifesaver training to include prolonged field care scenarios. Lena felt something catch in her throat. That's excellent news, sir. It's your work. You earned it. Baker paused. There's one more thing. We'd like to offer you a permanent position as a senior medical advisor. It would involve regular consultations, training development, and continued protocol innovation. The work would be classified, well compensated, and based here in Washington. Lena stared at the screen. A permanent position? Yes. You'd have the resources and authority to shape military medical policy at the highest levels, to ensure that the next generation of medics has everything you didn't, to turn your experience into institutional knowledge that will save lives for decades. It was everything she'd been working toward, everything she'd wanted to accomplish, and it meant giving up the last remnants of the quiet life she'd tried to build. Can I have time to think about it? She asked. Take all the time you need. The offer stands indefinitely. The screen went dark. Hendricks smiled. Congratulations. I haven't accepted yet. You will. This work is in your blood. You can't walk away from it any more than you could stop breathing. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she still had a choice. But Hendricks was right. The work mattered too much to abandon. That evening, Lena met Marcus for dinner at a restaurant near the waterfront. Ranger lay under the table, calm and content. So, Marcus said, raising a beer. You're famous now. I'm notorious. Same thing in this town. He clinked his bottle against her water glass. To surviving the spotlight. To surviving, period. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, two operators who understood that some experiences didn't need to be discussed. Finally, Marcus asked, Are you going to take the job? How did you know about that? Collins might have mentioned it. Lena smiled. Of course he did. So? I don't know yet. Part of me wants to go back to Denver and pretend none of this happened. But that's not really an option anymore, is it? No, you're visible now. Might as well use it. Lena looked out at the water, watching boats move across the Potomac. What would you do? Marcus considered the question seriously. I'd ask myself what I'm running from and what I'm running toward. If you go back to Denver, are you running from the work or toward something better? I'm running from the visibility, the expectations, the weight of knowing that people are watching. And if you take the job, I'm running toward the chance to actually fix things, to make sure the next generation doesn't have to learn the lessons I did, to turn all those terrible experiences into something that matters. Marcus nodded. Sounds like you already know the answer. Lena sighed. I hate that you're right. I'm a SEAL. I'm always right. She laughed despite everything. You're ridiculous. And you're about to become one of the most influential people in military medicine, so I guess we're both dealing with uncomfortable truths. They finished dinner and walked along the waterfront. Ranger trotted beside them, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting smells. What happens now? Lena asked. After all of this? You accept the job. You do the work. You change the system from the inside, and eventually people forget about the airport incident and remember you for what you actually accomplished. And the harassment, the threats, the people who blame me for Whitaker's death, they'll move on to the next outrage. That's how these things work. The noise fades. The truth remains. Lena wanted to believe that. As they walked back toward the restaurant parking lot, her phone buzzed one final time. A message from Collins. FYI, Justice for Grant movement officially disbanded. Leadership released a statement acknowledging they were wrong about the facts. Harassment should stop within 48 hours. Lena showed Marcus the message. He smiled. Told you. Truth wins eventually. Eventually. It's better than never. They reached their cars. Marcus opened his door, then turned back. One more thing, he said. When you're ready to celebrate taking that job, and you will take it, Ranger and I know a great steak place. Just say the word. Lena smiled. I'll keep that in mind. She drove back to her hotel, exhausted but lighter than she'd felt in days. The fight wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more scrutiny, more moments when she'd question whether visibility was worth the cost. But tonight, she could rest. Tomorrow, she'd make her decision. And the day after that, she'd start changing the world. One protocol at a time, one life at a time, until the work she'd done in the darkness finally brought light to others. In her hotel room, Lena opened her laptop and began drafting an email to General Baker. She typed 3 words. I accept. When do I start? Her finger hovered over the send button. Then a new email appeared in her inbox. The subject line made her blood run cold. We need to talk about what really happened in Kabul. The sender was listed only as someone who knows. Lena's hand froze on the mouse, because Kabul was a name that shouldn't exist in her history, a place she'd never been, on a mission that had never happened, with casualties that were never supposed to be mentioned, and someone, somehow, had connected her to it. Lena stared at the email subject line until the words blurred. Kabul, a city she'd officially never visited, an operation that had never been recorded. A night 3 years ago when everything had gone catastrophically wrong and 12 people had almost died because intel was bad, extraction was delayed, and the team medic, her, had been forced to make decisions that still haunted her dreams. She clicked the email open with hands that had gone cold. The message was brief. Ms. Hart, I was part of the QRF that pulled your unit out that night. I've kept quiet for 3 years because that's what operators do. But after watching what happened at the airport and seeing you testify about medical gaps, I think it's time someone told the full story. Not for publicity, for accountability. The people who sent you in without proper support need to answer for it. Call me when you're ready. Captain Jake Reynolds, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired. And below the message was a phone number and a photograph. Lena opened the image and felt her chest constrict. It showed a dusty compound at night, illuminated by portable floodlights. In the foreground, a figure in tactical gear. Her, 3 years younger, covered in blood that wasn't hers, worked over a casualty on an improvised litter. Behind her, Rangers provided security while bodies were loaded onto a helicopter. The photo was grainy, taken with night vision equipment, but unmistakably real. Evidence of an operation that officially didn't exist. She closed the laptop and tried to breathe normally. Someone had documentation. Someone was willing to go public. Someone wanted to expose the mission that had nearly broken her. Her phone rang. Collins. "You got an email," he said without preamble. "You're monitoring my inbox?" "I'm monitoring everything right now. Who's Captain Reynolds?" "QRF commander from an operation I can't discuss." "The Kabul reference?" "Yes." Collins was quiet for a moment. "How bad is this?" Lena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "The operation went wrong. We were inserted into a denied area based on intelligence that turned out to be incomplete. We took casualties. Extraction was delayed by 4 hours. I kept 12 people alive in a compound with no power, no supplies, and hostile forces trying to breach our perimeter. When QRF finally arrived, they found us holding a position that should have been overrun. And this was classified at what level? Above yours? Then how does Reynolds have photographs? Because he was there. Rangers document everything for after-action reports. Someone in his chain of command must have let him keep a copy." Collins swore softly. "What does he want?" "Accountability. He thinks the people who planned that mission should answer for the failures. And he wants to use you as the vehicle for that accountability." "Yes." "Are you going to call him?" Lena watched a plane descend toward Reagan National, its lights blinking against the dark sky. "I don't know." "Let me be very clear about something," Collins said, his tone shifting to formal briefing mode. "If you engage with this, you will be opening a door that cannot be closed. That operation will be investigated. People with stars on their shoulders will be asked uncomfortable questions. Classified programs will be exposed, and you will be at the center of all of it." "I'm already at the center of attention." "This is different. The airport incident was public from the start. Kabul is classified. Going public means potentially facing criminal charges for disclosure of state secrets. Reynolds is the one disclosing. You'd be confirming it. That's legally indistinguishable." Lena closed her eyes. "So I'm supposed to just ignore it? Pretend that operation didn't almost kill everyone involved? Let the planners who sent us in blind walk away without consequences? I'm saying you need to think very carefully about whether this fight is worth what it will cost you." "That's exactly what I said about the airport interview. And look how that turned out. You won, but it wasn't free. This will be worse." Lena ended the call without responding. She sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, staring at Reynolds' message. Part of her wanted to delete it, wanted to pretend it had never arrived, wanted to accept Baker's job offer and focus on the future instead of dragging up the past. But another part, the part that had spent 7 years in the field watching good people die because someone in an office had made bad decisions, wanted to burn it all down. She picked up her phone and dialed the number Reynolds had provided. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Hart." "Captain Reynolds." "Just Jake now. I got out 2 years ago." "Why contact me now? Why not 2 years ago? Why not 3? Reynolds' voice was calm, measured. "Because 3 years ago, you were still operational. Exposing that mission would have compromised your ability to work. 2 years ago, you disappeared into civilian life, and I respected that choice. But now? You're already public. You're already fighting. And I think it's time the people who plan these operations face the same scrutiny as the people who execute them. You understand that going public could result in criminal charges for both of us." "I understand. I also understand that I kept 3 of your patients alive during that extraction by following your instructions over the radio. I understand that without you, my team would have been recovering bodies instead of wounded. And I understand that the officers who planned that cluster of a mission got promoted while you got nightmares." Lena felt something crack inside her chest. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to tell Congress what really happened that night." Not the sanitized version, not the classified briefing. The truth. What it's like to operate in denied areas with inadequate support. What happens when intelligence failures meet operational reality. What it costs the people on the ground when planners make mistakes from the safety of headquarters. And you think that will change anything? I think it's the only thing that might. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Send me everything you have. Photos, after-action reports, anything that documents what happened. I'll review it and decide if I'm willing to move forward. You'll have it within the hour. Jake? Yeah? If we do this, there's no going back. You understand that? I've understood that since I saved the email address. I'm ready if you are." The line went dead. Lena sat in silence, processing the weight of what she had just agreed to consider. Then her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Heard you got an interesting email. Want to talk about it?" She typed back, "How does everyone know everything?" "Because Collins is paranoid and shares information with people he trusts. Coffee in 30 minutes? Make it an hour. I need to think. I'll bring Ranger. Thinking works better with dogs." Despite everything, Lena smiled. 60 minutes later, she sat across from Marcus in a quiet bar near the hotel. Ranger lay at their feet, his presence somehow making the conversation easier. Marcus waited until she'd ordered before speaking. "Reynolds's message is legitimate. I checked him out through JSOC channels. Everything he said about the Kabul operation is verifiable within classified systems. Collins asked you to vet him. Collins asked me to make sure you weren't walking into a trap. And? You're not. Reynolds is exactly who he claims to be. Decorated Ranger, solid reputation, no history of instability or attention-seeking. If he says he wants accountability, I believe him." Lena took a sip of her drink. "Tell me honestly, if you were in my position, would you do this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "If I had documentation of a mission where leadership failures nearly got my team killed, and I had the platform to expose those failures? Yes, I would, because the next team deserves better. Even if it meant criminal charges? Even then, some fights are worth the cost. That's easy to say when it's hypothetical." "It's not hypothetical for me," Marcus's voice dropped. "I've been in situations where bad planning cost lives, where officers made decisions from safety that put my guys in impossible positions. I've written reports that got buried because they made important people uncomfortable. So yeah, if I had the chance to force accountability the way Reynolds is offering you, I'd take it." Lena studied him. "You're trying to talk me into this. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're considering. Reynolds is offering you a weapon. Whether you use it is your choice." Her phone buzzed. An encrypted email from Reynolds containing 6 files, photographs, excerpts from after-action reports, medical documentation from the casualties she'd treated that night. Everything carefully redacted to protect operational details, but clear enough to tell the story. She opened the first photograph. It showed the compound in daylight, before the operation. A standard structure in a residential area, nothing remarkable about it except for the intelligence assessment that it was being used by high-value targets. The second photograph showed the same compound 12 hours later. Bullet holes in every wall. Blast damage from grenades. Blood stains on the ground where Lena had worked through the night, keeping people alive. The third photograph was the one that broke her. It showed her sitting against a wall after the extraction, helmet off, face streaked with dirt and blood, staring at nothing. The exhaustion in that image was absolute. The trauma was visible. The weight of what she'd endured was captured in brutal clarity. She'd never seen this photo before, hadn't known it existed, and now it was evidence of a night she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Marcus saw her expression change. "What is it?" She turned the phone so he could see. He looked at the image for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You were 26 in that photo." 27. It was 3 weeks after my birthday." "You look 50. "I felt older." Marcus handed the phone back. "What happened that night?" Lena closed her eyes and let the memory surface. Intelligence said the compound held 3 targets. Low-risk entry, quick extraction. We inserted at 2300 hours. By 2315, we knew the intel was wrong. There weren't 3 targets, there were 12. And they knew we were coming. She paused, gathering herself. We took contact immediately, heavy volume. 2 of our guys went down in the first 30 seconds. I stabilized them while the rest of the team secured the building. But we were pinned. Extraction couldn't come in hot because of the weapons fire, so we held. For 4 hours. 4 hours and 17 minutes. I performed emergency surgery on a collapsed lung using a ballpoint pen and a chest seal. I managed a traumatic amputation with a tourniquet and prayer. I kept a kid with a sucking chest wound breathing by manually bagging him because we didn't have mechanical ventilation, and I did all of it while the building was being attacked by people who very much wanted us dead. Marcus's jaw was tight, and when QRF arrived, they found us still fighting, all 12 patients alive, ammunition down to final magazines, but alive. That's why Reynolds wants to tell the story. That's why I'm not sure I can. Why not? Lena opened her eyes. Because telling it means reliving it, means putting those photographs in front of Congress and explaining why the operation failed, means identifying the officers who approved the mission based on bad intelligence, means standing in a hearing room and describing how a 19-year-old operator begged me not to let him die while I was using a pen to keep his lung from collapsing. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. You've testified. You've fought for accountability. You've won battles that most people don't even know happened. If you want to walk away from this one, no one will blame you. Lena looked down at their joined hands. I'll blame me. Then that's your answer. She pulled her hand back gently. I need to talk to Hendricks first. See if there's a way to do this without ending up in prison. There might not be. I know. Marcus stood. Call me when you decide. Whatever you choose, I'll support it. Even if it's reckless? Especially if it's reckless. Reckless is how we change things. After he left, Lena sat alone with Ranger, who'd somehow migrated from Marcus's side to hers. She scratched behind his ears and thought about what came next. The smart move was to delete Reynolds' email. Accept Baker's job. Focus on the future. But smart moves didn't change broken systems, and this system desperately needed changing. Lena called Hendricks at 0600 the next morning. The colonel answered immediately, her voice alert despite the early hour. I've been expecting this call. Collins told you. Collins tells me everything that matters. What's your decision? I want to testify about the Kabul operation, but I need to know if there's a legal pathway that doesn't result in criminal charges. Hendricks was quiet for a beat. There might be. If we frame it as congressional oversight of classified operations rather than unauthorized disclosure, the Senate Intelligence Committee has authority to compel testimony on programs within their jurisdiction. If we can get them to subpoena you, everything you say becomes protected. Can you make that happen? Senator Caldwell owes me a favor. Let me make some calls. 3 hours later, Lena received a formal subpoena from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence requiring her testimony regarding operational planning and medical support in classified theater operations. The subpoena didn't mention Kabul by name, but the date range covered the exact period of the mission. Collins called immediately. This is either brilliant or insane. Which do you think? Both. Caldwell just gave you legal cover to expose a classified operation in the name of oversight, but she's also putting her own reputation on the line. If this blows up, it takes her down too. Then I'd better make sure it doesn't blow up. Lena, once you testify, there will be investigations, officers will be questioned, careers will be destroyed. Are you prepared for that? She thought about the 19-year-old with the chest wound, the operator who'd lost part of his leg, the faces of 12 people who'd trusted her to keep them alive in a situation that should never have happened. Yes, she said. I'm prepared. The hearing was scheduled for 48 hours later. Lena spent that time reviewing Reynolds' documentation, preparing her testimony, and mentally rehearsing every detail of that night. She didn't sleep much, didn't eat much, just worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that this was her last chance to make the nightmare mean something. Marcus checked on her twice, brought food she barely touched, sat with her in silence when words felt impossible. On the morning of the hearing, Hendricks met her outside the secure facility where the testimony would take place. "Last chance to back out," Hendricks said. "I'm not backing out." "Good. Because Caldwell just told me that 3 generals are in the gallery today. They know what's coming. They're preparing to defend themselves." "Let them." Hendricks studied her. "You've changed since the airport." "I got tired of being quiet." "It suits you." They walked into the facility together. The hearing room was smaller than the previous one, designed for the most sensitive intelligence discussions. Only committee members and essential personnel were present, but the atmosphere was electric with tension. Senator Caldwell called the session to order. "Ms. Hart, you're here under subpoena to provide testimony regarding operational planning and medical support in classified operations. You understand that this testimony is protected and cannot be used against you in criminal proceedings." "I understand, Senator." "Then please begin by describing the operation referenced in your subpoena." Lena took a breath and started talking. She described the intelligence that had promised a low-risk target, the insertion that had turned into an ambush, the casualties that had mounted faster than she could treat them, the 4 hours of holding a position while waiting for extraction that might never come. She described performing emergency procedures with improvised equipment, making decisions about who could wait and who needed immediate intervention, keeping people conscious and fighting while their bodies tried to shut down. She described the moment QRF arrived and Reynolds had looked at her with something between horror and respect, unable to believe that everyone was still breathing. And then she described the aftermath. The commendations that had been filed and then buried because acknowledging them would require acknowledging the operation. The after-action reports that had been classified at levels so high that even the people who'd been there couldn't access them. The complete absence of accountability for the planning failures that had nearly killed 12 operators. When she finished, the room was silent. Caldwell spoke first. "Ms. Hart, to be clear, you're stating that this operation was approved based on faulty intelligence, executed without adequate support, and resulted in near-catastrophic casualties that were only prevented by your extraordinary efforts." "That's correct, Senator." "And despite the obvious failures, no one in the planning chain faced consequences." "Not to my knowledge." One of the generals in the gallery, a man named Morrison with enough ribbons to paper a wall, stood abruptly. "Senator, I object to this characterization. Operations in denied areas carry inherent risks. Intelligence is never perfect. Ms. Hart is describing the reality of warfare, not planning failures." Caldwell's voice was ice. "General Morrison, you're welcome to provide testimony after Ms. Hart completes hers. But right now you will sit down and remain silent." Morrison sat, his face flushed with anger. Caldwell turned back to Lena. "Do you have documentation to support your testimony?" "Yes, Senator. Provided by Captain Jake Reynolds, who commanded the QRF that extracted us." She handed over the photographs and reports. The committee members passed them around, their expressions growing darker with each image. One senator, a former Army officer named Patterson, held up the photograph of Lena after the extraction. "This is what combat medics look like when we send them into impossible situations, exhausted, traumatized, wondering why the people who planned the mission aren't sitting beside them." Another senator spoke up. "Ms. Hart, in your professional opinion, could this operation have been planned differently to reduce casualties?" "Absolutely. Better intelligence gathering would have revealed the actual number of targets. Staging a QRF closer to the insertion point would have reduced extraction time. Providing enhanced medical supplies would have given me better tools to treat casualties. Any of those changes could have prevented the situation from becoming critical." "And were any of those recommendations made during planning?" "I wasn't part of the planning. I was attached to the unit 3 days before insertion." "So you had no input on medical requirements?" "Correct." Patterson leaned forward. "Let me see if I understand this correctly. You were attached to a high-risk operation with 3 days' notice, no input on planning, inadequate medical supplies, and faulty intelligence. And when everything went wrong, you kept 12 people alive through sheer skill and determination. Then the military classified everything so thoroughly that we're only learning about it now because you were subpoenaed to testify." "That's an accurate summary, Senator." "And the officers who planned this disaster faced no consequences?" "Not that I'm aware of." Patterson looked at General Morrison. General, would you like to explain why that is? Morrison stood again, his composure cracking. Senator, Operation Security requires that certain missions remain classified. We cannot conduct effective oversight if every operation is subjected to public scrutiny. This isn't public scrutiny, General. This is a closed Intelligence Committee hearing, and we're not asking about operational details. We're asking why planning failures that nearly killed 12 operators didn't result in any accountability. Morrison had no answer. Caldwell intervened. General Morrison, you and the other officers involved in planning this operation will be required to provide written testimony within 10 days. This committee will conduct a full review of the planning process, intelligence assessment, and risk management protocols. Failure to comply will result in formal investigation by the Inspector General. Morrison's face went pale. Senator, that could compromise. I don't care what it compromises. We're done sacrificing operators to protect planners. This committee will determine whether negligence occurred, and if it did, there will be consequences. She turned back to Lena. Ms. Hart, thank you for your testimony. I know this wasn't easy. It was necessary, Senator. Yes, it was. As Lena left the hearing room, she passed General Morrison in the hallway. He looked at her with barely concealed fury. You just destroyed careers, he said quietly. You destroyed them yourselves, Lena replied. I just provided the documentation. She walked away without looking back. Outside, Reynolds was waiting. He'd flown in to observe the hearing from a secure viewing room. You did it, he said simply. We did it. What happens now? Lena thought about that. Now they investigate. And hopefully, the next unit that gets sent into a denied area will have better intelligence, better support, and better chances of coming home alive. Reynolds extended his hand. It's been an honor. They shook. As he walked away, Collins appeared from around a corner. That was quite a performance, he said. It wasn't a performance. It was testimony. Either way, you just set in motion a chain of events that will take months to resolve. Morrison and his colleagues will fight back. They'll try to discredit you. They'll claim operational security was compromised. They'll make your life difficult. Let them try. Collins smiled slightly. You really have changed. I got tired of watching bad people win because good people stayed quiet. Well, you're not quiet anymore. They walked through the Pentagon corridors toward the exit. Lena felt lighter than she had in years. Not because the fight was over, it was just beginning, but because she'd finally stopped running from the past and started using it to change the future. Her phone buzzed, a message from General Baker. Saw your testimony. Still want that job? She typed back, more than ever. Good. Report Monday. We have work to do. 6 weeks later, the Department of Defense Inspector General released a preliminary report on the Kabul operation. The findings were damning. Intelligence failures at multiple levels, inadequate risk assessment, insufficient medical support allocation, lack of appropriate QRF staging, absence of oversight from senior leadership. 3 officers were relieved of command pending further investigation. 2 were forced into early retirement. Morrison was reassigned to a desk job with no operational authority. The report specifically cited Lena's testimony as instrumental in uncovering systemic failures that had been hidden by classification for years. Military medical communities celebrated the outcome. Reform recommendations included mandatory medical input during operational planning, enhanced trauma supplies for all denied area operations, and revised protocols for intelligence verification. The changes wouldn't bring back the people lost in previous operations, but they might save the lives of people in future ones. And that was enough. On a quiet Sunday morning, 3 months after the airport incident, Lena stood in Arlington National Cemetery. She'd come to pay respects to the 19-year-old operator she'd lost 3 years ago, the one with the femoral artery injury who died despite everything she'd done. His grave was marked with a simple headstone: name, rank, dates. Nothing that indicated the classified nature of his service or the operation that had taken his life. Lena knelt and placed flowers at the base of the stone. I'm sorry it took so long, she said quietly. But I finally made sure it meant something. The protocols are changing. The training is improving. The next generation will have better tools. I know that doesn't bring you back. but maybe it saves someone else. She stayed there for a long time, letting the grief she'd carried for 3 years finally settle into something manageable. When she stood, Marcus was waiting a respectful distance away. Ranger sat beside him. "How'd you know I'd be here?" she asked.
"Because I know you, and I know that before you could move forward, you needed to say goodbye." They walked through the cemetery together, past rows of white headstones marking the graves of people who'd served and sacrificed. "How's the new job?" Marcus asked. "Overwhelming, challenging. Exactly what I needed."
"And the airport incident? Ancient history. Someone else is viral now." Marcus smiled. "See? I told you the noise would fade."
"You were right. I'm a SEAL. I'm always right," Lena laughed.
"Still ridiculous." They reached the cemetery gates and stopped. "What's next?" Marcus asked. "I'm designing a new training program for combat medics, comprehensive protocols for prolonged field care. Everything I learned in 7 years condensed into something they can actually use. It launches in 6 months." "That's incredible." "It's necessary. There are still too many gaps. Too many situations where medics are set up to fail. I'm going to fix as many as I can. And after that? After that, I find the next problem and fix that too." Marcus nodded. "Sounds like a good plan." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Lena said, "Thank you for everything. For showing up at the airport when Ranger recognized me, for meeting me for coffee when I needed perspective, for supporting me through all of this. You would have done the same. Maybe, but I'm still grateful." "Then I'll accept the gratitude." Marcus checked his watch. "I've got a flight to catch, heading back to San Diego for a training evolution." "Safe travels." "You too. And Lena?" "Yeah?" "Keep fighting. The system needs people like you." "People like us," she corrected. Marcus smiled. "Fair enough." He walked away with Ranger, leaving Lena alone at the cemetery gates. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. Dozens of messages from military medical personnel asking questions about protocols, requests for consultations, invitations to speak at training programs, opportunities to share the knowledge she'd earned through years of impossible situations. She was no longer invisible, no longer anonymous, no longer someone who could be dismissed or ignored. She was Lena Hart, combat trauma specialist, medical innovator, Pentagon advisor, voice for operators who couldn't speak for themselves. And she was just getting started. That evening, Lena sat in her new apartment in Arlington unpacking boxes that had finally arrived from Denver. She came across a folder she'd kept hidden for 3 years, commendations and citations from operations she could never discuss publicly. She opened it and read through the documents. There were recommendations for Valor Awards that had been downgraded to administrative recognition because acknowledging them would expose classified operations. Letters from commanding officers praising her work in language so vague it was almost meaningless. Documentation of lives saved that could never be publicly celebrated. She'd kept these papers as proof to herself that the work had mattered. Now she realized she didn't need them anymore. The work spoke for itself. The protocols she'd developed were saving lives. The testimony she'd given was changing policy. The reforms she'd pushed for were becoming reality. That was proof enough. She put the documents in a fireproof safe and locked it. Not to hide them, just to preserve them for the day when enough time had passed that the operations could be declassified, and the people who'd served could finally be recognized properly. That day might be years away. But it would come. And when it did, the world would know what she and people like her had sacrificed. Her phone rang. Sarah, from Newsnight America. Lena almost didn't answer, then changed her mind. Sarah. Lena, I hope I'm not bothering you. I wanted to let you know that our interview was nominated for a journalism award. Best Interview of the Year. Congratulations. I couldn't have done it without you being willing to speak honestly. So thank you. You gave me a fair platform. That's all I needed. I also wanted to ask, would you be interested in doing a follow-up? 6 months from now, once the DoD reforms have been implemented. Show people that speaking up actually leads to change. Well, Lena considered this. 6 months ago, she would have said no immediately, would have protected her privacy at all costs. Now? Send me the details. I'll think about it. That's all I can ask. Take care, Lena. After they hung up, Lena walked to the window and looked out at the city. Washington at night was beautiful. Monuments glowing, traffic flowing, life continuing in all its complicated glory. Somewhere out there, military planners were reviewing new protocols she'd helped design. Combat medics were training with equipment she'd recommended. Officers were being held accountable for failures that would have been buried if she'd stayed silent. The airport incident that had started all of this, Whitaker's mockery, the viral videos, the public scrutiny, had felt like a catastrophe at the time. But it had forced her out of hiding, had given her a platform she never would have sought, had turned private expertise into public impact. She thought about Whitaker sometimes, wondered if things could have gone differently, wondered if she could have handled the situation in a way that didn't end with his death. But she'd stopped accepting blame for choices other people made. Whitaker had mocked someone he assumed was powerless, and learned too late that quiet strength was the most dangerous kind. Lena picked up her laptop and opened the document she'd been working on. The comprehensive training manual for prolonged field care. Hundreds of pages of hard-earned knowledge, techniques tested under fire, protocols written in survival. She typed for hours, losing herself in the work. And when she finally stopped, exhausted but satisfied, she wrote one final sentence. To the medics who will use these protocols, you are walking into situations I've already survived. These tools are my gift to you. Use them well. Come home alive. And when you do, pass the knowledge forward so the next generation has even better chances. That's how we honor the people we've lost. That's how we make the sacrifice mean something. She saved the document and closed her laptop. Tomorrow she'd submit it for review. Next week it would enter the publication pipeline. Within 6 months, it would be required reading for every combat medic in the United States military. And somewhere, in a forward operating base, or a denied area, or a hostile compound, a young medic would use her protocols to save a life that might otherwise have been lost. That medic would never know Lena's name, would never know about the airport incident or the congressional testimony or any of the fight she'd waged to get this knowledge into their hands. They'd just know that the techniques worked, that the protocols were sound, that someone before them had figured out how to survive the impossible and cared enough to write it down. And that was exactly how it should be. Lena turned off the lights and went to bed. She dreamed of the people she'd saved, not the ones she'd lost, because after years of carrying the weight of the dead, she'd finally learned to celebrate the living. And in the morning, she'd wake up and do it all over again. One protocol at a time, one life at a time, one fight at a time, until the system was better, until the support was adequate, until the people who served had everything they needed to come home alive. That was the mission now. And unlike her deployments, this one would never end, because the work would always matter, the fight would always be worth it. And the quiet strength of people who refused to stay silent would always be the most powerful force for change. Lena Hart had been dismissed as nobody, humiliated by someone who couldn't imagine she mattered, and she'd responded by proving that quiet professionals who'd done extraordinary things were the most dangerous people to underestimate. Not because they sought revenge, but because they had nothing left to prove and everything to fight for. And in the end, that made all the difference.